Chapter 2660. Uncovering the stalker. Duterte hurriedly presented the Kunlun jade pillar with both hands and said with a trembling voice, "Immortal Master, this is the Kunlun jade pillar. I didn't know about it because I didn't receive Elder Chen's message. Now, I finally know that this Kunlun jade pillar belongs to you." Zhuowen sneered in his heart. He knew that Duterte was lying through his teeth when he saw his expression. If Elder Chen didn't inform Duterte, how could Duterte muster so many people to carry out the drill? Zhuowen took the Kunlun jade pillar, and a surge of energy immediately gushed out. Duterte screamed and smashed into the wall behind him. He was dead. Zhuowen's gaze was cold. He didn't even look at Duterte. When Duterte wanted to kill him, he was already a dead man in Zhuowen's heart. "Let's go." Zhuowen took the Kunlun jade pillar and ignored Elder Chen and the others who were petrified. Instead, he walked straight out of the presidential palace. Not long after they walked out of the presidential palace, Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the huge presidential palace behind him collapsed. The moment the presidential palace collapsed, the entire country of Country F was in chaos. "Sir, our private jet has been destroyed. How do we return to Huaxia next?" Elder Chen asked cautiously. "Just follow me." Zhuowen waved his sleeve again. Elder Chen and the others felt the world spin. When they came to their senses, they found themselves standing on the top floor of the Realm Knight Group. Is this teleportation? In just a short while, we left Country F and came to Jinling? Elder Chen and the others looked out through the transparent glass. When they found that the scenery outside was indeed the Jinling city in their memories, the fear in their hearts reached its peak. Teleportation was already an immortal's ability. However, when they thought of the various supernatural powers that Zhuowen had shown before, Elder Chen and the others felt that it was reasonable. They were even more in awe of Zhuowen. "I'll stay with the Realm Knight Group for the time being. Once I've collected all the Kunlun jade pillars, I'll naturally leave." Zhuowen glanced at Old Chen. After saying this, he entered the Realm Knight Group, randomly chose the most spacious room, and went into seclusion. Of course, Zhuowen was not really in seclusion. Instead, he planned to use this time to find the other 13 Kunlun jade pillars. When he scanned China, he had already confirmed the location of the 13 Kunlun jade pillars. Now that he had found the Kunlun jade pillar in Country F, the other 13 Kunlun jade pillars would be much easier. Of course, Zhuowen did not plan to search for them himself. Instead, he sent Bloodscale to search for the 13 Kunlun jade pillars. He planned to spend the rest of his time on Earth as an ordinary person. For the rest of the time, Zhuowen was like an ordinary young man. He went shopping, watched movies, or entertained himself. It was as if Zhuowen had really become an ordinary person. Finally, on the third day, Bloodscale came back with the 13 Kunlun jade pillars. When the 15 Kunlun jade pillars were suspended side by side in front of Zhuowen, they emitted a blazing jade-colored light. Immediately, the 15 Kunlun jade pillars merged together, forming a thicker and longer jade pillar. This jade pillar was exactly the same as the one in the green-haired mummy's hand. "I finally found the second jade pillar. It seems that we can go to Kunlun Mountain now." The green-haired mummy's eyes flickered with anticipation. The next day, Zhuowen left a bottle of elixir for Old Chen and the others and left Jinling City without saying goodbye. Of course, with their speed, they arrived at Kunlun Mountain in an instant. Kunlun Mountain was the first sacred mountain in China's legends. Since ancient times, there were many myths and legends about Kunlun Mountain. Kunlun Mountain was also known as the ancestor of the dragon veins. When Zhuowen arrived at Kunlun Mountain and saw the majestic and vast mountain range in the northwest of China, his eyes narrowed. This was because he felt a trace of energy in the Kunlun mountain range. This energy was not the energy of the stars, but an energy that was of a higher level than the energy of the stars. Heavenly Path's origin energy? Zhuowen's eyes were filled with shock. In the Kunlun mountain range, there was actually Heavenly Path's origin energy that was of a higher level than the energy of the stars. Moreover, this was only a planet. It was undoubtedly unbelievable. You felt it too, right? There is definitely Heavenly Path's origin energy in the Kunlun mountain range. It's just a planet, and I think that other than the land of origin, I can't think of any other place that has heavenly path's origin energy, the green-haired mummy said calmly. Previously, this fellow had sneaked out alone and came to Mount Kunlun several times. When he realized that he couldn't open the restriction around Mount Kunlun with just one jade pillar, he came back to help Shuwen collect the Kunlun jade pillars. Of course, Zhuowen knew that if a single jade pillar could open the seal around Kunlun Mountain, this guy would definitely enter Kunlun Mountain alone. He would definitely not leave any benefits for Zhuowen. Kid, before we open the seal, I think we should work together to find the two stalkers behind us. Just as Zhuowen was about to enter Kunlun Mountain, the green-haired mummy suddenly spoke. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with doubt, and his expression changed slightly. Along the way, he basically did not find any signs of being followed. The green-haired mummy sneered and said coldly to somewhere behind him, "Do you want me to find you? Or do you want to come out on your own?" Zhuowen followed the gaze of the green-haired mummy and fell on a mountain behind them. His eyes were filled with doubt. He did not feel that the mountain was unusual, and his divine sense did not detect anything hidden in the mountain. However, Zhuowen soon discovered that two wriggling human figures had appeared on the surface of the mountain. Soon after, the wriggling human figures became more and more awake. In the end, they transformed into a woman in a cheongsam and a steel giant. These two people were Fire Plume and Steel Plume of the Purple Red House who had been following Zhuowen and the others. At this moment, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were also looking at the green-haired mummy with a strange expression. Chapter 2661. Kunlun the green-haired corpse shrugged and said, "Why are you looking at me like that? I just found out too." Zhuowen naturally wouldn't believe the green-haired corpse's nonsense. Instead, he looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and continued, "You two, why have you been following me for so long?" After saying this, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared at Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Fire Plume frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Brother Zhuo, we're actually looking for you to cooperate. Are you looking for the origin ground?" Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He didn't expect Fire Plume to know about the origin ground. Seeing Zhuowen fall silent, Huoyu continued, "Actually, it's like this. The news of the land of origin has already spread like wildfire in the Xianmi heavenly domain. You might not know this, but most of the cultivators here are actually here for the land of origin. And more cultivators will come because the origin ground is in your 8 heavenly regions. Zhuowen frowned and said, "How did your Xianmi heavenly region know about the origin ground in the 8 heavenly regions?" Fire Plume said indifferently, Blood Prison's Shui Wuhan provided the information. After he returned to the Xianmi heavenly region, he spread the news of the origin ground and attracted the attention of many cultivators. Fire Plume continued, "Don't worry, as long as you let us enter the origin ground, we definitely won't reveal this place. Of course, if you're not willing, then I can only spread the news." "You dare!" the green-haired corpse said coldly, his killing intent soaring to the sky. Steel Plume and Fire Plume's pupils shrank at the same time after sensing the terrifying killing intent of the green-haired corpse. They didn't expect the green-haired corpse to be so terrifying that it could release such a terrifying killing intent. "If you really want to make a move, I don't mind spreading the news. I don't think you guys are that impulsive. Letting the 2 of us in is better than letting a group of outsiders in," Steel Plume suddenly said. "Let them in," Zhuowen said. Zhuowen could sense that Steel Plume wasn't simple. At the very least, he wasn't confident that he could kill the 2 of them before they spread the news. Moreover, he didn't think that the green-haired corpse could do it either. Although this guy was full of killing intent and looked very strong, he was actually a paper tiger. After all, this guy's strength had dropped too much. Now, he was only on par with Zhuowen's 2-star Pangu sacred body. This time, this guy is the one making the decision. Since he has agreed, I have no objections. Otherwise, I would have killed you 2 ants long ago. Under Zhuowen's strange gaze, the green-haired corpse pretended to cast a sidelong glance at Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Immediately, it slowly withdrew the killing intent on its body. Steel Plume and Fire Plume naturally didn't know the details of the green-haired corpse. Seeing that the green-haired corpse had withdrawn its killing intent, the 2 of them finally felt relieved. "You should pay a price. Do you want us to take you in for free?" Zhuowen suddenly said coldly. Fire Plume smiled. She had already expected this. With a wave of her hand, she took out a jade slip and threw it to Zhuowen. "This is..." Zhuowen frowned slightly. "This is the first 2 moves of the tyrannical Dao slaying technique," Fire Plume said lightly. Zhuowen was stunned. He checked it with his divine sense and revealed a look of ecstasy. "You actually have the complete tyrannical Dao slaying technique," Zhuowen said happily. The tyrannical Dao slaying technique had a total of 3 moves. The first move was the slaughtering Dao finger. Zhuowen had already cultivated it to the peak. 1 finger was enough to kill an ordinary heavenly Dao master. The second move was the slaughtering Dao palm. It was said that it could kill an ordinary heavenly Dao master. The third move was the slaughtering Dao hand. It was the most powerful move. When cultivated to the peak, it could kill a heavenly Dao master. Fire Plume and Steel Plume looked at Zhuowen strangely as he treated the tyrannical Dao slaying technique like a treasure. To be honest, although the tyrannical Dao slaying technique was much more powerful than an ordinary Dao technique, it was an existence that could be found at a roadside stall in the Xianmi heavenly territory. The main reason was that the tyrannical Dao slaying technique could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master. After a cultivator attained Dao, he naturally needed to cultivate a corresponding Dao technique. The higher the level of the Dao technique, the better. A Dao technique like the tyrannical Dao slaying technique, which could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master, was disdained by most cultivators in the Xianmi heavenly territory. This was because once a Dao technique was cultivated, it was very difficult to change to another Dao technique. The gains did not make up for the losses. Once a Dao technique was chosen, it naturally had to be perfect. For example, the tyrannical Dao slaying technique only had 3 moves. It could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master. This cultivator would be delusional if he wanted to step into the second step of Dao validation. Even though the tyrannical Dao slaying technique was indeed powerful, not many people were willing to cultivate such a Dao technique. Of course, there were people who cultivated the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Generally, in the Xianmi heavenly territory, it was the itinerant cultivators who were struggling and had no choice but to choose to cultivate the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. This was the first time Fire Plume had seen someone so ecstatic after obtaining the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Fire Plume wanted to remind him but was stopped by Steel Plume. Zhuowen obviously did not know the flaws of the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Now that they could use this tyrannical Dao slaying technique to exchange for entering the land of origin, it would be best. Otherwise, Zhuowen would definitely ask for an exorbitant price, which would not be good for them. Fire Plume also thought of this and nodded silently. However, looking at Zhuowen's ecstatic expression, he felt a little pity in his heart. Zhuowen put away the jade slip and nodded to Fire Plume with satisfaction. Okay, this thing happens to be what I need. I won't take anything else from you. Next, Zhuowen and the others began to rush towards the Kunlun Mountains. Soon, under the guidance of the green-haired corpse, the group stopped in a canyon in the deepest part of the Kunlun Mountains. Chapter 2662. Extreme Blade Array. The abyss was extremely deep and bottomless. Whether it was Steel Plume, Fire Plume, or Bloodscale, their divine senses could not see what was inside the abyss. Only Zhuowen and the green-haired mummy frowned the moment the abyss appeared. Zhuowen's divine soul had been improved by the Pangu banner and had become extremely powerful. Because his divine soul was too powerful, Zhuowen could only mobilize a part of its divine soul power. Zhuowen knew very well that his current strength was too weak. Although his divine soul had been modified to become extremely powerful, it was a pity that he could only use a part of its divine soul power. However, he believed that as his strength slowly increased, the amount of divine soul power he could use would naturally rise as well. It was this powerful divine soul that made Zhuowen aware of the horror in the abyss. He could vaguely feel that there was an extremely powerful rule power in the abyss. If he fell in, he would be seriously injured even if he did not die. This feeling shocked Zhuowen. His current doppelganger had cultivated the 2-star Pangu sacred body. Its physical body was extremely tough and powerful. Even Lord Hunyuan might not necessarily be able to defeat him. However, there was a force in the abyss that made him feel the threat of death. This showed how terrifying and powerful the force in the abyss was. Zhuowen glanced at the expressions of the others and found that Fire Plume, Bloodscale, and Steel Plume were at a loss. Obviously, the three of them did not feel that there was anything wrong with the abyss below. The green-haired mummy also had a dignified look. Obviously, like Zhuowen, they had also discovered the difference in the abyss. Is this the entrance to the land of origin? Fire Plume looked at the dark abyss below her and frowned slightly. Yes, but this abyss is very dangerous. Zhuowen nodded and immediately looked at the green-haired mummy. He asked in a deep voice, "Green Hat, what kind of power exists in the abyss? I think that even second-step Dao confirming cultivators might fall into this abyss." The moment he said that, Fire Plume and the other two were shocked. Fire Plume said in disbelief, "Are you trying to scare me?" "Oh, if you don't believe me, you can go in and feel it for yourself," Zhuowen mocked. Fire Plume stomped her foot, her face flushed red with anger. She said coldly, "Let's go in then." However, just as Fire Plume wanted to go in and try, he was stopped by Steel Plume. "Miss, please be careful. Let's try using a substitute puppet first," Steel Plume said. Fire Plume calmed down. She had been angry just now, but now that she had calmed down, she knew that she had been too impulsive. Although she and Steel Plume didn't find anything dangerous in the abyss, they still had to be cautious. Fire Plume took out a puppet from her spirit ring. This puppet was made of straw and was no different from an ordinary puppet. Zhuowen was surprised. He sensed a Daoist rhyme aura from this straw puppet. Moreover, this Daoist rhyme aura also contained a trace of vitality. The moment Fire Plume activated the puppet, the vitality hidden in the Daoist rhyme bloomed like 100 flowers and became more and more exuberant. In the end, the puppet actually stood up like a living person. Although this puppet was only the size of a palm, the aura on its body was extremely powerful. Zhuowen estimated that this puppet should have the strength of a half-step heavenly Dao master. It could be said that this kind of thing was basically an invincible existence in the 8 heavens. However, in Fireplume's hands, it was just a puppet that was like a toy. It was obvious how rich Fireplume was. After Fireplume left her divine sense on the puppet, it stood up as if it had come to life. Then, it jumped out and entered the abyss. Soon, Fireplume spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful eyes revealed a look of horror. "Miss, what's wrong?" Steel Plume's expression changed. "There is a terrifying force in this abyss." The puppet was blasted to pieces by this force when it entered about 1,000 meters. Fireplume's face was gloomy. Then, she looked coldly at Zhuowen. However, she couldn't say anything. After all, Zhuowen had already warned her that this abyss was not simple. It was just that she didn't believe him. However, Fireplume found it strange that Zhuowen knew that this abyss was not simple. After all, she and Steel Plume had used their divine senses to explore this abyss. However, they didn't find anything wrong with this abyss. What they didn't know was that Zhuowen's divine sense was much stronger than theirs. At a glance, he could see that there was a powerful concealment array inside this abyss. This concealment array just happened to conceal that force. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to detect that such a terrifying force existed in the abyss. This force is too terrifying. Steel Plume, even if you go in, I think it will be very difficult. Your life might even be in danger, Fireplume said in a deep voice. Steel Plume's expression changed slightly. He could see that Fireplume was extremely afraid of the force in the abyss. "Then what should we do?" Steel Plume asked worriedly. Fireplume also looked at the green-haired corpse. Just now, when Zhuowen discovered that something was wrong with the abyss, he immediately asked the green-haired corpse. Obviously, this green-haired corpse wasn't as simple as it appeared to be. The green-haired corpse said indifferently, "This is the extreme blade array at the entrance of the land of origin. It's a Genesis grade array. I don't know which little guy set it up back then." "What? A Genesis grade array?" Fireplume, Steel Plume, and Bloodscale cried out in shock at the same time. Their voices were full of disbelief. Even Zhuowen was shocked by this. He was no longer the newbie from before. He had a certain understanding of the Tao validation stage. A Genesis grade array could already trap a god of creation, and a god of creation was a genuine third-step Tao validation stage mighty figure. Such a powerful being could kill any one of them with a flick of his finger. "According to what you said, if it's a Genesis grade array, we won't be able to enter at all," Zhuowen said with a frown. He knew that the green-haired corpse was determined to obtain the terrain of the land of origin. There was no way it wouldn't think of a way. Moreover, he also knew that the green-haired corpse's origins were mysterious. It knew much more about the land of origin than he did, so it definitely had a way to deal with this. "This array is much weaker than before, but it's still very powerful. If you want me to force my way in, I might be able to force my way in, but you guys," the green-haired corpse looked at Zhuowen, Fireplume, and the others with a disdainful smile. Fireplume was infuriated. However, when it thought of the powerful murderous aura that the green-haired corpse had just released, it could only swallow its anger. Zhuowen chuckled coldly in his mind. Of course, Zhuowen knew that the green-haired corpse's physical body was extremely tough. However, he also knew that this guy's power had greatly decreased. Even if they could force their way in, they wouldn't be able to gain anything. He definitely had another way. "But I still have a way." Chapter 2663. The Origin entrance. Zhuowen was stunned. He glanced at the green-haired mummy. He was wondering why the mummy had been following him ever since he left the ominous vein. It turned out that it wanted to make use of his Pangu banner. However, he still asked skeptically, "Are you sure that the Pangu banner can weaken the power of this formation?" "You should know that I don't know how to use it at all." The green-haired mummy said indifferently, "You're too weak. It's wishful thinking if you want to use the Pangu banner. However, the Pangu banner has acknowledged you. You have the aura of the Pangu banner on you. This extreme blade formation won't harm you at all." Zhuowen frowned. Although he was puzzled, he could tell that the mummy didn't seem to be lying to him. With that thought, Zhuowen looked at Fireplume and Steel Plume and said, We have a way to enter the abyss. However, if you want to follow us in, you'll have to pay a price. Fire Plume stomped her feet in anger. She felt that Zhuowen was too shameless. He was actually bargaining again. Tell me, what do you want? Fire Plume said coldly. I'm very interested in pills and formations. I don't know if you have any books on these two fields. The higher the level, the better. Zhuowen rubbed his hands and said. He had inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's knowledge of alchemy. In fact, it was very easy for him to become a heavenly Tao alchemist. However, he didn't have the corresponding pill recipes. If he had also inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's memories, perhaps he wouldn't have to worry about pill recipes. Unfortunately, he had only inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's knowledge. This was what made Zhuowen the most speechless. He had a lifetime of knowledge, but he didn't have any pill recipes to practice on. What a scam. Moreover, his formation skills had already reached the pinnacle of the 9th level. As long as he had the corresponding books on formations, it wouldn't be too much of a problem for him to break through to the Heavenly Tao Divine Formation Master level. Books on alchemy and array formation? You're also a pill master and array master? Fire Plume asked suspiciously. Zhuowen admitted that he was a 9th grade alchemist and a god formation master. It was only because the 8 heavens didn't have any higher grade books in this field that he hadn't successfully broken through yet. I do have some basic pill Tao and array Tao manuals on me. Before Fire Plume could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Zhuowen, who said, I need high-grade records of alchemy and formations. If it's from a street stall, then forget it. Fire Plume was furious, but there was nothing she could do. She frowned and took out a golden book from her spirit ring. This is the highest level alchemy book I have on me. As for the Tao of Arrays, it's only a basic book. If you're still not satisfied, then I can't do anything about it. Miss, this alchemy book is... Steel Plume's expression changed slightly, but he was stopped by Fire Plume. Zhuowen could tell that this alchemy book was extraordinary from Steel Plume's expression. He took the alchemy book, flipped through it casually, and was immediately engrossed in it. This was because the alchemy book was filled with all kinds of pill recipes. It could be said that there were hundreds of different styles and varieties. Most of the pill recipes for the first step of Tao validation were recorded in it. With this alchemy book, it really wasn't difficult for Zhuowen to refine heavenly Tao, primordial Tao, and mixed essence divine pills. As for the array Tao manual that Fire Plume gave him, although it was very basic, it could still help him break through to the heavenly Tao divine master level. There were also many heavenly Tao divine arrays listed in it. Of course, if Zhuowen wanted to continue breaking through in the future, he would naturally need to find higher grade books. Let's go. Follow behind me. After putting away the alchemy book with satisfaction, Zhuowen waved at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and directly entered the abyss. Hey, you're going in just like that. Aren't you afraid of death? Fire Plume asked in horror. Just follow me. If you don't believe me, then don't come in. After saying that, Zhuowen plunged into the abyss. The green-haired mummy and Bloodscale naturally followed without hesitation. Fire Plume's expression was uncertain, but in the end, she still followed behind Zhuowen. However, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were extremely cautious and kept a distance from Zhuowen. They knew that an extremely terrifying force would appear about 1,000 meters deep in the abyss. At that time, she wanted to see how Zhuowen would block that terrifying force. Soon, the group entered 1,000 meters deep into the abyss. The instant Zhuowen entered the 1,000-meter radius, he felt that vast power form a terrifying pressure that squeezed his entire body. It was as if his entire body was going to be flattened. Just as Zhuowen couldn't bear the pressure and was about to be annihilated by it, the Pangu banner in his divine soul emitted an invisible ripple. Then, an inexplicable vacuum formed around Zhuowen. Zhuowen heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the green-haired mummy was right. The Pangu banner was indeed able to restrain this terrifying force. The green-haired mummy and Bloodscale also entered Zhuowen's side. After seeing that Zhuowen and the other two were safe and sound, Fire Plume was first shocked, then she heaved a sigh of relief and followed Zhuowen. Then, the group went deeper into the abyss. Half a day later, they found a black whirlpool at the bottom. This whirlpool was formed by rotating in the void. It was like a deep black mouth that could swallow everything in the world. "Let's go in," the green-haired mummy said. Zhuowen and the others didn't hesitate and immediately entered the whirlpool. Zhuowen only felt that the world was spinning, then he lost consciousness. When Zhuowen woke up, he found that he was in a natural cave. At the front of the cave was an extremely magnificent bronze gate. Countless strange beasts were carved on the bronze gate, and these strange beasts were worshipping the 12 statues at the top of the gate. Zhuowen was no stranger to one of the 12 statues. It was Zhurong, one of the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. After fusing with the Zhurong Jiyu, he was naturally no stranger to Zhurong's image. Since Zhurong appeared among the 12 statues, they should be the statues of the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. Zhuowen looked around and found that the green-haired mummy, Bloodscale, and the other 3 were not here. He knew that after entering the black whirlpool, they should have been transmitted to this place separately. This should be the place of origin. What a strange place. It looks like an ordinary cave, but why does it give me a feeling of being in a vast starry sky? Zhuowen muttered in a low voice and came in front of the bronze gate. The bronze gate was so big that Zhuowen was like an ant in front of it. Moreover, the bronze gate was tightly shut, and Zhuowen's divine sense was blocked by the gate. Zhuowen tried to push the bronze gate, but found that it was like an ant trying to shake a tree. Hey! The Pangu banner is moving. Just as Zhuowen was sighing dejectedly, the Pangu banner in his divine soul suddenly stirred. Chapter 2664. A Bountiful Harvest Creek. With a gentle wave of the Pangu banner, the originally motionless bronze door slowly opened to both sides. The moment the bronze door opened a crack, Zhuowen went in, and the Pangu banner returned to Zhuowen's spirit. However, a path inexplicably appeared in Zhuowen's mind. At the end of this path, there was a stone floating on an altar. Zhuowen knew that this was the image sent to him by the Pangu banner. It should be that the Pangu banner needed this stone, but he didn't know what it was. Something that the Pangu banner was thinking about was definitely not a simple stone. This origin ground should be related to Pangu. Otherwise, the Pangu banner wouldn't be so excited. Zhuowen quietly pondered for a while, then followed the path given to him by the Pangu banner and walked forward. This was a huge natural square. On both sides of the square, there were rather rough stone sculptures. These stone sculptures were extremely ancient. There were old and young, men and women. Some of them were holding ancient bamboo slips and reading seriously. Some were looking up at the sky with their hands behind their backs. Some were wearing armor and looked heroic. Moreover, Zhuowen found that behind each stone sculpture, there was a secret door. Of course, these secret doors were very hidden. If Zhuowen didn't get the path given to him by the Pangu banner, he wouldn't have been able to see them. There were more than 30 secret doors here. The moment Zhuowen opened the first secret door, he was immediately stunned. Because inside this secret door, there were actually all divine medicines with astonishing medicinal effects. Moreover, these divine medicines were all Tao-proving divine medicines. Most of them were heavenly Tao divine medicines, and a few were primordial Tao divine medicines. After opening the second secret door, Zhuowen was even more shocked. This was because this secret door also contained divine medicines. Furthermore, the divine medicines were of a higher grade than the first secret door. They were all primordial Tao-level divine medicines, and there were even a small number of primordial chaos-level divine medicines mixed in. Zhuowen opened one secret door after another and found that each secret door contained a corresponding Tao-proving divine medicine. Of course, there were high and low levels of divine medicines in the secret doors. Zhuowen even found a second-step Tao-proving divine medicine in one of the secret doors. This is, when Zhuowen opened the last secret door, he was stunned. There was only one divine medicine in this secret door, but its medicinal efficacy was much more powerful than all the other secret doors he had found before. This was a very ordinary stalk of grass, but this stalk of grass contained a terrifying medicinal power. This medicinal power formed a powerful current that flowed upwards like a countercurrent. As the medicinal power flowed, Zhuowen seemed to see an illusory world within the flowing medicinal power. This is definitely a divine medicine that is beyond the second step Tao-proving divine medicine. Zhuo guessed in his heart, but he had already pounced forward to grab the divine grass and put it into his spirit ring. At first, this divine medicine sensed that Zhuo wanted to escape. However, because of the aura of the Pangu banner on Zhuo's body, the divine medicine was suppressed and Zhuo easily caught it. If other cultivators had come, they would not have been able to catch this divine medicine at all. After all, this divine medicine had a spirit and its ability to escape was unparalleled. Unfortunately, it had met Zhuo, who had the Pangu banner. Zhuo could not suppress the excitement in his heart. He had never thought that he would be able to obtain so many divine medicines at once. Moreover, each of them was of such a high level. If the outside world knew that Zhuo had obtained a divine medicine, it would definitely cause a stir among countless forces and cause many forces to arrest Zhuo. Not to mention that Zhuo had first step and second step Dao proving divine medicines. Just the fact that Zhuo had obtained a third step Dao proving divine medicine was enough to cause an unprecedented sensation. It was enough to alarm the Xian Mi Heaven Domain's Dao Palace forces. Of course, Zhuo would not leak these things unless he had a death wish. As expected of the place of origin, there are so many divine medicines. Zhuo left the square with excitement in his heart. Now, he found that the route given to him by the Pangu banner was the best one. He basically did not encounter any obstacles or terrifying traps along the way. The whole way was unimpeded and every time he arrived at a place, he would discover more or less. A Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal Mine? And it's a special class Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal Mine. When Zhuo accidentally dug up a Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal Mine, he was completely stunned. It was not that he had never obtained special class Heavenly Dao Origin crystals before, but when he saw an entire special class Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal Mine, even Zhuo, who had a strong heart, was dumbfounded. It should be known that ordinary first-step Dao validation cultivators could not even take out a special class Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal, let alone an entire special class Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal Mine. The value of this special class Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal Mine was probably comparable to that of a Dao Palace faction. After storing a large pile of special class Heavenly Dao Origin crystals, Zhuo found that his spirit ring was almost full. Only then did he stop collecting special class Heavenly Dao Origin crystals. With reluctance, Zhuo could only leave the special class Heavenly Dao Origin crystal mine and continue forward. Finally, Zhuo arrived at the end of the route. It was a huge altar. The entire altar was square, tens of thousands of square meters in size. The altar was made of white jade. At the front of the altar stood a sundial. Behind the sundial was an altar with 10,000 steps. At the top of the altar was a large bronze cauldron. Above the cauldron floated a very ordinary stone. This stone was almost exactly the same as an ordinary stone. The only difference was that the surface of this stone was engraved with complicated patterns. Moreover, Zhuo found that these patterns were like the pulse of a human body. They were pulsating on the surface of the stone, emitting a 7-colored light with every pulse. What kind of stone is this? Zhuo looked at the strange stone above the cauldron in shock. He was extremely shocked. The Pangu banner in Zhuowen's divine soul suddenly became agitated. Then, it started to sway in his divine soul like a lively child. "You want that stone?" Zhuo asked subconsciously. However, after realizing that this Pangu banner was not alive, he laughed at himself in his heart. But he soon found that the Pangu banner in his spirit actually nodded like a human. Zhuo thought for a while and finally walked to the top of the altar. When he arrived in front of the main hall, the first thing he looked at was not the stone above the cauldron, but the sundial at the front. The sundial was tilted 45 degrees, facing the altar. Zhuo found that the thin black needles on the sundial were spinning rapidly. Moreover, they were spinning faster and faster. It was as if time was flying at this moment. Chapter 2665. Profound meaning in the image. There was a vast and boundless starry sky. This starry sky was cold and lonely, without any stars. Zhuo knew that this should be the initial starry sky when Pangu had just split open the chaos. In the center of this starry sky, there was a huge figure that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was Pangu. Pangu's body was collapsing. His essence blood turned into 12 beams of bloody light and shot in all directions. His primordial spirit turned into 3 beams of green light and escaped into the void. Pangu's flesh and blood spilled in all directions, turning into sparkling stars that filled the sky. Among the countless stars, Zhuowen saw a stone shoot out of Pangu's heart. This stone emitted a 7-colored light. Is that Pangu's heart? Zhuowen guessed. The image came to an abrupt end when the 7-colored stone shot out of Ji Yuxin's mouth. Zhuowen tried to touch the 7-colored stone with his hand, but he was bounced back by an invisible force when he was 1 foot away. After several attempts, Zhuowen gave up on this method. Instead, he controlled the Pangu banner to approach the 7-colored stone. Although he could not fully control the Pangu banner, it was not difficult for him to move it. The moment the Pangu banner approached the 7-colored stone, the 7-colored lines on the stone's surface shot into the Pangu banner like rainbow-colored veins. The Pangu banner emitted a strange buzzing sound. Zhuowen clearly felt the joy of the Pangu banner from this buzzing sound. Crack! 2 hours later, the 7-colored lines on the 7-colored stone in front of the Pangu banner completely dimmed, then turned into countless fine powder. Zhuowen knew that all the energy of this stone should be condensed in the 7-colored lines on its surface. When all the energy of the lines was absorbed by the Pangu banner, this stone was no different from an ordinary stone. This is, after completely absorbing the energy of the 7-colored stone, Zhuowen found that the wide surface of the Pangu banner had changed a lot. Originally, the banner should have drawn the image of Pangu holding the heaven-splitting double axes. Now, Zhuowen found 4 words at the 4 corners of Pangu's image. The 4 words at the 4 corners of the banner were break, erect, prohibit, and destroy. The image of Pangu seemed to have materialized, much clearer than before. Also, Zhuowen found that the image of Pan Jiyu on the banner was more vivid and full of spirituality than before. For example, if the previous image of Pangu was an ordinary black and white painting, then the current image of Pangu was a colorful painting with additional colors. Profound. The moment the 4 words appeared on the banner, a corresponding message appeared in the depths of Zhuowen's mind. This message introduced the meaning of the 4 words. From the information in his mind, Zhuowen knew that the 4 words represented the 4 powerful profound meanings contained in the Pangu banner. They were created by Pangu when he was born. Among the 4 profound meanings, the break profound meaning was the sky-splitting blade, the erect profound meaning was the creation mysterious light, the prohibit profound meaning was the infinite primordial chaos, and the destroy profound meaning was the death of heaven and earth. These 4 profound meanings all had the power to destroy heaven and earth, and they could only be displayed through the Pangu banner. Moreover, the 4 profound meanings had completely different abilities. For example, the sky-splitting blade was the break profound meaning, which could tear the chaos, split time and space, and open up the infinite world. The create mysterious light was the erect profound meaning, which could be divided into yin and yang, the 5 elements, and give birth to the infinite earth, water, fire, and wind. The infinite primordial chaos was the restrict profound meaning, which could create chaos, cover up the universe, and create the infinite chaotic world. The death of heaven and earth was the destroy profound meaning, which could destroy heaven and earth, ancient and modern, and destroy countless worlds. Zhuowen thought for a moment and roughly understood the functions and effects of these 4 profound meanings. However, Zhuowen also knew that it was still a little difficult for him to use the 4 great profundities. Of course, Zhuowen also knew that once these 4 profound meanings were successfully displayed, their power would definitely be extraordinary. Moreover, Zhuowen was most surprised by the Pangu banner's materialized image of Pangu. He knew that the Pangu banner's biggest gain after absorbing the colorful stone was not the 4 profound meanings, but the materialized image of Pangu. From the message transmitted by the Pangu banner, he knew that the Pangu pattern was actually the Pangu shadow, the ultimate profound meaning of the Pangu banner. It was said that as long as one could activate the power of the Pangu banner, they could summon the Pangu shadow and display the supreme power of Pangu. However, this profound meaning was the ultimate profound meaning of the Pangu banner, and the requirements were extremely harsh. At the very least, one had to have a 7-star Pangu sacred body to be qualified to display it. If one's strength did not reach the 7-star Pangu sacred body, it was said that if one forcibly displayed the ultimate profound meaning of the Pangu shadow, one's body and soul would be destroyed. As for the other 4 profound meanings, the requirements were relatively lax. As long as one could condense the Pangu sacred body, they would be qualified to display the profound meanings. Moreover, as the Pangu sacred body became stronger, the power of the 4 profound meanings would also become stronger. Now that he had activated these 4 profound meanings, whether it was his original body or his doppelganger, as long as he had the Pangu banner in his hand, he could use them. Of course, the ultimate profound meaning of the Pangu shadow could only be displayed after he condensed a Pangu sacred body and reached the 7-star Pangu sacred body. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, an ear-piercing roar came from the passage north of the altar. Zhuowen's eyes flickered, and he jumped down and rushed to the north. As soon as he entered the passage, Zhuowen found that there were countless black shadows flashing in the passage. Every black shadow had a pair of blood-red eyes, which were staring at Zhuowen greedily. Zhuowen spread out his divine sense and recognized the true faces of these black shadows. They were bats, half the size of a man, hanging upside down in the air above the passage. Now that Zhuowen had suddenly entered the passage, he immediately awakened these bats. Then, the passage was filled with the sound of flapping wings. Then, these bats roared and rushed toward Zhuowen, trying to devour him. Zhuowen snorted coldly and immediately drew his sacrificial death sword. Blade after blade of deathlight flashed and slammed into the bodies of the countless bats in the surroundings. Sizzle. 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 The bats were all blown away by the sacrifice of death sword. However, what made Zhuowen frown was that these strange bats had thick skin. The sacrifice of death sword did not cause much damage to them. Zhuowen's attack had naturally angered this group of bats. These bats let out even more ear-piercing roars. The sound waves were like ripples, gathering in Zhuowen's ears. Even Zhuowen felt an extremely uncomfortable buzzing sound in his ears. It was as if countless drums were beating next to his ears. Zhuowen snorted, and his powerful divine sense burst out like ripples. He immediately used the soul kill. Then, Zhuowen was surprised to find that the huge bats around him were like mice that had encountered a cat. They let out sounds of horror and all fell to the ground. Chapter 2666. Flaming Bat. Zhuowen looked at this scene strangely and soon realized that it was his spiritual sense that caused all this. To be more precise, it was the aura of the Pangu banner in his spirit. After his spirit was transformed by the Pangu banner, every time he used his spiritual sense, it would carry the ancient aura of the Pangu banner. These bats were not afraid of Zhuowen's powerful spiritual sense, but the ancient aura carried by Zhuowen's spiritual sense. After figuring out this connection, Zhuowen used his spiritual sense to form a veil that covered the surface of his body. Then, like a gust of wind, he rushed into the depths of the passage. Although he could kill all the bats here if he continued to use soul kill, it would consume a lot of his energy. Moreover, his spiritual sense found that there were more bats in this passage than the ones in front of him. There were more ahead. If he had to kill them one by one, how long would it take? Along the way, these strange bats were afraid of Zhuowen's spiritual sense. Although many of them were ready to attack, none of them dared to come forward. About an hour later, Zhuowen arrived at the place where the sound came from. Immediately, he found that what appeared in front of him was a huge open space. At the center of this open space was a large magma pool with an extremely high temperature. Endless waves of heat surged over like scorching tornadoes. Above the magma pool was a huge flaming bat, flapping a pair of huge flame wings on its back. This flaming bat was much larger than the bats Zhuowen had encountered along the way. It was about 30 meters in length. In particular, the aura emitted by this flaming bat was really terrifying. Zhuowen was sure that this flaming bat at least had the strength of primordial Chaos Lord. At this moment, in front of the flaming bat, 2 figures were struggling to resist the attacks of the flaming bat. These 2 figures were not unfamiliar to Zhuowen. They were Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Boom! Boom! The flaming bat let out a shrill cry, and countless streams of lava turned into surging streams that poured down in front of Fire Feather and Steel Feather. Poochie! Fire Plume, who was holding a red feather fan, was at the end of her rope. Now that she was hit by the stream of magma, she could not hold on any longer. She spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backward, landing not far away. Seeing this, Steel Plume roared and his whole body erupted with a metallic luster. His originally huge body expanded several times, and he quickly waved his fists. Countless fist shadows set off a terrifying storm of daoist rime. The terrifying stream of magma was blasted into countless magma droplets by the fist shadows. Steel Feather, on the other hand, used the recoil to continuously retreat. In the process of retreating, he pulled Fire Feather and retreated together. Roar. Steel Plumes, the flaming bat hooey's Fire Plume is me Fire Bat. The flaming bat roared at the sky, flapped its wings, and disappeared like a bolt of lightning. When it reappeared, it was already above Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Countless flames erupted from the flaming bat's body, forming an extremely solid flaming prison that enveloped Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Moreover, the flaming prison erupted with terrifying flames, like an endless rain of fire, surrounding Fire Plume and Steel Plume. The flaming bat's flaming energy was extremely special and powerful. Even if Steel Plume used all his strength, he could only barely protect himself and Fire Plume. Zhuowen silently watched this scene. He could feel that the flaming bat was not to be trifled with. Especially in this predicament. If Steel Plume and Fire Plume did not have a stronger trump card, the two of them would undoubtedly die. Steel Plume and Fire Plume's eyes were filled with despair. They had already used all their trump cards, but they were still no match for the flaming bat. They knew very well that when Steel Plume could not hold on, it would be their death. At the same time, Fire Plume and Steel Plume also noticed Zhuowen, who had just appeared. However, the despair in their eyes did not diminish in the slightest. In their opinion, Zhuowen's strength was on par with Steel Plume's. Even if the two of them joined forces, they were no match for the flaming bat. Zhuowen's arrival was just another death sentence. The flaming bat glanced at Zhuowen, who was not far away, with a human-like look of contempt, as if it was looking at an ant. It continued to leisurely control its flames to attack Fire Plume and Steel Plume. In the flaming bat's opinion, the human who had just appeared was simply courting death. It was not in a hurry to make a move. It planned to deal with the two ants in front of it first. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He realized that a dense swarm of bats had unknowingly gathered behind him. These bats stared coldly at Zhuowen with their scarlet eyes and blocked Zhuowen's path. Zhuowen sneered in his heart. He knew what the flaming bat was planning. Unfortunately, if the flaming bat knew that he had the Pangu banner in his spirit, it would not be so careless. Zhuowen, you'd better leave quickly. You'll just lose your life if you stay. Fire Plume's voice rang in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen looked at the Fire Plume in the Cheongsam. He thought that Fire Plume had sent him a voice transmission to ask him to help them. He did not expect that Fire Plume wanted him to leave. Soul Kill. Zhuowen took a step forward, and his powerful divine sense turned into a hurricane that swept out. Instantly, the bats behind him that were eyeing him covetously were affected by this divine sense, and they kept squeaking as they fell to the ground, twitching and struggling. Zhuowen shot out like an arrow from a bow and headed directly for the flaming bat. When the flaming bat saw that Zhuowen had actually blown away the swarm of bats with a single blow, its originally careless gaze suddenly became much more serious. Roar. The flaming bat opened its mouth and spat out a stream of flames that turned into countless spirals and shot toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen coldly snorted and immediately used the slaughtering Dao finger. Countless heavenly energy converged into a huge finger that crossed the sky and landed on the spirals of flames. However, what made Zhuowen's face turn gloomy was that when the slaughtering Dao finger blasted on the spirals of flames, it only caused the spirals of flames to stagnate for a moment before they collapsed. The slaughtering Dao finger was Zhuowen's strongest technique at present. However, it only caused the spirals of flames to stagnate for a moment before they collapsed. It could be seen that the strength of the flaming bat was far beyond Zhuowen's imagination. Soul Kill. Zhuowen quickly retreated. At the same time, he used the Soul Kill and blasted it directly toward the flaming bat. Originally, The flaming bat wanted to follow up with another attack. However, when it felt the ancient aura of Zhuo Wen's soul kill, it let out a sharp cry. Its body trembled, and it involuntarily took a few steps back. Zhuo Wen's consciousness attack did not have much effect on the flaming bat. The main thing that affected it was the ancient aura contained in the consciousness. Chapter 2667. Annihilate. Bang, 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 bang. The moment the flaming bat was frightened by the aura of the Pangu banner, Zhuo Wen's eyes lit up. He took a step forward and 3 sword lights appeared from his body. The 3 sword lights were the Blood Immortal Sword, the Thunder Fire Sword, and the Death Sacrifice Sword. The 3 divine swords turned into 3 different directions and easily pierced the flaming bat's vital points before it could react. Roar! Roar! The flaming bat was furious. The energy around its body swirled and blew away the 3 divine swords that had pierced its body. However, Zhuo Wen could feel that the flaming bat was heavily injured. After all, he had aimed at the bat's 3 vital points. The wounds that were pierced by the divine swords were bleeding profusely, causing the flaming bat's movements to become much slower. A flaming hurricane swept out. Immediately, the flaming bat ignored Fire Plume and Steel Plume and attacked Zhuo Wen with all its might. Zhuo Wen frowned slightly. He tried his best to activate his consciousness and use the soul kill. He wanted to use the aura of the Pangu banner to suppress the flaming bat. The flaming bat was indeed affected by the soul kill, and its movements were a lot slower. However, this fellow's strength was not something ordinary bats could compare to. It actually withstood the suppression of the aura and charged towards Zhuo Wen. This guy is finished. Fire Plume, who had just broken free from the flaming prison, almost collapsed to the ground. Fortunately, Steel Plume caught him. He could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly when he saw the flaming bat rushing toward Zhuo Wen. Steel Plume's eyes flickered. Although he also wanted to help, resisting the flaming bat had consumed too much of his strength. He had no ability to stop the flaming bat, which was now in a berserk state. Moreover, the flaming bat was too fast. Even if he took action now, he would not be able to catch up. Zhuo Wen, on the other hand, was much calmer. The 4 great mysteries that the Pangu banner had transmitted to him kept echoing in his mind. His eyes revealed a look of enlightenment. These 4 profound meanings had been deeply imprinted in Zhuo Wen's mind under the effect of the Pangu banner. It was just that he had encountered such a situation before he tried to release the profound meanings. Now that they were in such a dangerous situation, Zhuo Wen became even calmer. The 4 great profound meanings kept flashing through his mind. Just as the flaming bat was about to approach Zhuo Wen suddenly moved. Zhuo Wen slowly raised his right hand and waved it casually. The moment he waved his right hand emitted an intense golden light that could not be looked at directly. Although this golden light was only a small part of Zhuo Wen's hand blade, the golden light it emitted was earth-shattering and contained an extremely terrifying power. Poochie. Zhuo Wen's karate chop landed lightly on the flaming bat. The karate chop ignored the flame defense in front of the flaming bat and went straight through. It then landed heavily on the flaming bat's body. The flaming bat screamed at the sky. Then, countless cracks appeared on its body. Dazzling golden light burst out from the cracks. In the end, the flaming bat was completely enveloped by the golden light and was annihilated into nothingness. The moment the flaming bat was annihilated, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were stunned on the spot, unable to say a word. Zhuo Wen, on the other hand, was pleasantly surprised. Just now, when the flaming bat attacked, he used the profound meaning of destruction to create a chi blade. The final effect surprised Zhuo Wen. The chi blade was too terrifying. It destroyed the flaming bat with just one blow. Moreover, he knew very well that the real chi blade was extremely huge. It was said that it had the power to split the sky. Zhuo Wen was only at the beginner level. However, even if he was only at the beginner level, the chi blade that Zhuo Wen used was so terrifying that it made people tremble. It actually destroyed the flaming bat with one blow. However, Zhuo Wen soon felt an intense sense of fatigue in his body. He almost couldn't stand steadily. This caused Zhuo Wen to be secretly shocked at the terrifying consumption of the sky-splitting blade. Zhuowen quickly took out a pill that could restore essence from the spirit ring. After swallowing it, he felt that the weakness in his body had recovered a little. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with shock as he thought to himself, "Isn't this profound a little too taxing on me? If it weren't for the fact that I didn't fully unleash the sky-splitting blade, I'm afraid I would have been exhausted to death by the sky-splitting blade." Just now, Zhuowen had used up most of the energy in his body with just one blow. Zhuowen couldn't imagine that if he had used the second blow, he would have been done for. At the same time, he also had a deeper understanding of the power of the 4 profound meanings in the Pangu banner. At the very least, if he used these profound meanings, it shouldn't be a problem for him to kill an existence at the level of Lord Hunyuan. Steel Plume and Fire Plume had already come back to their senses. Fire Plume directly came in front of Zhuowen and pointed her slender finger at Zhuowen. She trembled and said, How did you do it?" Steel Plume stood behind Fire Plume and looked at Zhuowen with a complicated expression. He originally thought that Zhuowen's strength was at most on par with his. However, the process of Zhuowen using his strength to kill the flaming bat had shocked him too much. He also knew that the white-clothed youth in front of him was stronger than him. However, Steel Plume couldn't imagine how the white-clothed youth in front of him could be so powerful when he was only at the life-and-death extremities. In Steel Plume's opinion, even the peerless geniuses of Dao Palace forces wouldn't be able to kill a flaming bat at the level of Lord Hunyuan while at the life-and-death extremities. This simply defied common sense. However, the white-clothed youth in front of them had done it. Moreover, he had killed a flaming bat at the level of Lord Hunyuan right under their noses. Zhuowen came back to his senses and looked at Fire Plume indifferently. He said, "Oh. I just casually waved my hand and the bat was destroyed. It's that simple." Fire Plume's face flushed red. She said in exasperation, "How can it be that simple? This monster almost killed Steel Plume. You're only at the life-and-death extremities. How can you be a match for this flaming bat? I don't believe that you killed this flaming bat. It must be some expert hiding in the dark." Zhuowen frowned slightly. He felt that Fire Plume was too competitive. However, he didn't mind. He said, "If that's what you think, then so be it." Seeing Zhuowen's indifferent attitude, Fire Plume was furious. She stomped her foot and was about to speak again when Steel Plume stopped her. Brother Zhuo, I'm really sorry. Our young miss was too agitated and lost her mind. Please don't take it to heart." Chapter 2668. Pocket World. How did you get here after entering the origin grounds? Zhuowen asked casually. After Steel Plume explained, Zhuowen learned that Fire Plume and Steel Plume had also appeared in front of a bronze door after being sucked in by the vortex. However, the bronze door they were in wasn't tightly shut, but was open. However, after entering the bronze door, they had encountered many dangers. They had encountered many terrifying traps, and if not for their vigilance, they would have died long ago. Moreover, if not for Zhuowen's arrival, the two of them would have died without a doubt. Brother Zhuo, thank you for saving our lives this time. We discovered a high-class heavenly law origin crystal vein ahead, and we are willing to share it with you, Brother Zhuo. Steel Plume cupped his fists towards Zhuowen. Fire Plume's expression changed slightly, but when she remembered that Zhuowen was their savior, she didn't raise any objections even though she was unwilling. Zhuowen didn't mind. He had discovered a special class heavenly law origin crystal, and his spirit ring was almost filled to the brim with special class heavenly law origin crystals. It was normal for him to not care about high-class heavenly law origin crystals. A heavenly law origin crystal vein is too big. I don't think we can take it away with just the few of us. Moreover, the heavenly law of the heavenly law origin crystal vein is too powerful. Even if the spirit ring has so much space, the spirit ring itself can't withstand the terrifying heavenly law of the heavenly law origin crystal vein, Zhuowen said casually. When Zhuowen discovered the special class heavenly law origin crystal vein, he originally wanted to uproot it and store it in the Devourer King's space. However, he discovered that although the Devouring King's space was massive, it did not possess the power of laws of a true world. Due to the lack of power of laws, if he recklessly placed a special-grade heavenly law origin crystal vein into the devouring king's space, the space might not be able to withstand it and might even collapse. However, the space in the spirit ring was small and could only store a small amount of special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals. The heavenly Tao laws contained in this small amount of special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals were not too terrifying. However, the heavenly Tao law of the entire mine was too terrifying. Although the Devourer King's space was huge, it wasn't a real world. It didn't have the corresponding heavenly Tao law. Previously, Zhuowen had felt that something was wrong. This was also the reason why Zhuowen did not use the Devourer King's space to store the ore vein. What Zhuowen was surprised about was what kind of space Steel Feather and Fire Feather had. Not only could it withstand the powerful heavenly Tao laws of the heavenly Tao origin crystal vein, but it was also large enough to carry the entire vein. Steel Plume and Fire Plume exchanged glances, then looked at Zhuowen strangely and said in unison, although the heavenly law origin crystal vein is large, it is still possible to uproot it. There is a corresponding container in the Xian Mi heavenly domain that can store the heavenly law origin crystal vein. Zhuowen was startled. Immediately after, he looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume in disbelief and asked subconsciously, how? The ore vein is so big that the spirit ring can't possibly store it, right? Steel Plume smiled and said, indeed, the spirit ring can't store it, but the miniature world can. In the Xian Mi heavenly domain, the disciples of the major forces all have miniature worlds. These miniature worlds are very large, the size of a planet. Moreover, they also have corresponding world laws, which are not much different from a real world. They can withstand the heavenly Tao laws of the heavenly Tao origin crystal vein. Moreover, the miniature worlds of some super powerhouses have all kinds of powerful world laws. Every step they take is filled with killing intent. In these miniature worlds, they can do whatever they want. Zhuowen revealed a strange look. This was the first time he had heard of a miniature world. He had never heard of such a thing in the 8 heavenly domains. Only the higher-level Xian Mi heavenly domain could create such a strange miniature world. If one had a miniature world, they could indeed store an entire ore vein without fearing the backlash of the heavenly Tao laws of the heavenly Tao origin crystal vein. Zhuowen had obtained the Devourer King's clone for a long time. He only knew that the Devourer King's internal space was huge, but he didn't know how to use it, let alone how to form world laws in the Devourer King's internal space. Now that Zhuowen was enlightened by the miniature world, he couldn't help but wonder if the Devourer King's internal space could also form various world laws and become a real starry sky world. Although there were many stars in the Devourer King's internal space, these stars were still external. The world laws in these stars had been in the internal space for a long time. The world laws in these stars seemed to have dissipated, no different from the void around the internal space. Zhuowen looked at the dim stars in his internal space and sighed in relief. He was glad that he didn't keep the Ziwei galaxy and the Rika race in his internal space. With the dissipated world laws in the Devourer King's internal space, it would be difficult for him to cultivate to the 9 steps void sky steps. It would be wishful thinking if he wanted to prove his Tao in the internal space. Thinking about the Rika race, Zhuowen revealed a look of nostalgia. Back then, the Rika race was still developing in the far west of the Great Brahma domain. When Zhuowen returned to the Great Brahma domain, too many things happened. He didn't have the time to see how the Rika race was doing. When he returned to the Great Brahma domain, he planned to head to the far west to bring the Rika race back and bring them to the Xian Mi heavenly domain. How about this? I only want 10% of the high-grade heavenly Tao origin crystal vein, but can you give me a miniature world? Zhuowen cupped his fists towards Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Zhuowen was extremely curious about the miniature world. Perhaps he could get some inspiration from the miniature world and improve the Devourer King's internal space. At that time, Zhuowen could even transform the internal space in the Devourer King's internal space into a real starry sky. At that time, it wouldn't be like a pool of stagnant water like it was now. Fire Plume and Steel Plume frowned. They only had 2 miniature worlds on them. Even with their wealth, a miniature world was extremely precious. However, Zhuoan had saved their lives. Moreover, he only wanted 10% of the high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystal vein. After all, if it weren't for Zhuoan, they wouldn't be alive right now. Brother Zhuo, this is my miniature world. Take it. Steel Plume made a prompt decision. He immediately took out a ring and handed it to Zhuoan. This ring was similar to a spirit ring, but its appearance was more simple. If one didn't look carefully, they would think that it was a spirit ring. However, when Zhuoan took the ring and probed it with his divine sense, he felt a strong aura of vitality. Then, he found that there was a world with distinct heaven and earth inside the ring, as if he was on a huge planet. Chapter 2669. Promoted to Heavenly Tao Divine Array Master. Many thanks, Brother Steel Plume. Steel Plume waved his hand and reminded, Brother Zhuo, the principle of the miniature world is actually modified from the spirit ring. Brother Zhuo, it's best if you take good care of it. Also, you can put all your spirit rings in the miniature world. It doesn't reject other spatial items. Zhuo kept the miniature world and cupped his fists at Steel Plume. Then, he silently used the Devourer King's innate ability, Devour, to devour the principal energy in the miniature world. Soon, Zhuo was pleasantly surprised to find that when the principal energy of the miniature world entered Devour's miniature world, traces of principal energy actually appeared in the originally lawless world. Zhuo did not continue to absorb the principal energy. Instead, he silently observed the miniature world in the spirit ring on his finger. At the same time, he was constantly deducing and comparing the miniature world with the Devourer King's miniature world. Fire Plume and Steel Plume looked at Zhuo, who suddenly stiffened in front of them. Then, Steel Plume muttered to himself in astonishment, Brother Zhuo is deducing the principal energy of the miniature world? Is he in a state of enlightenment? Fire Plume was also shocked. He looked at Zhuo strangely. Although they knew that Zhuo also knew a little about arrays, they did not know that Zhuo was a grade 9 divine array master. Therefore, they felt that it was an arduous and unrewarding task for Zhuo Feng to deduce the miniature world. In their opinion, Zhuo would wake up very soon. However, the two of them waited for 3 days and 3 nights. On this day, the originally motionless Zhuo finally moved. Zhuo opened his eyes, which flashed with excitement. Then, Zhuo's body was surrounded by a powerful aura of Daoist rhymes. Fire Plume and Steel Plume were surprised to find that the Daoist rhymes around Zhuo had actually formed a complicated array formation. However, these restrictions and arrays were short-lived and soon disappeared. An hour later, the restrictions and arrays formed by the Daoist rhymes had all dissipated and Zhuo opened his eyes. Fire Feather and Steel Feather looked at Zhuo with complicated expressions. They knew that at this moment, Zhuo's array Dao level had undergone a transformation. He had actually advanced to the Heavenly Dao level. How is this possible? This guy only took a look at the surface restrictions of the small world, and he actually comprehended it just like that and became a Heavenly Dao divine formation master. Isn't this too sick? Huoyu thought to herself in disbelief. Steel Plume's expression was not much better than Fire Plume's. Only Zhuo's eyes were filled with excitement. He was the only one who knew why he could suddenly achieve a breakthrough. It was because he had the Devourer King's internal space as a reference. Zhuo couldn't be more familiar with the Devourer King's internal space. This time, he had obtained a small world filled with laws. Comparing the two different worlds, Zhuo immediately became enlightened and entered a state of epiphany. Although it had only been 3 days, Zhuo felt like 3 years had passed during this period of enlightenment. During this period of enlightenment, he had completely deduced the entire process of Devourer King's internal space evolving into a great world filled with laws. It was precisely because he had deduced the true great world during that moment of enlightenment that Zhuo's array Dao level had also undergone a complete transformation in that instant. He had naturally advanced to become a Heavenly Dao array Dao master. The moment Zhuo opened his eyes, he saw Fire Plume and Steel Plume looking at him with complicated expressions. Brother Zhuo, follow me to the ore vein. Steel Plume calmed down and said. Zhuo shook his head and said, you guys go first. When the time comes, just leave behind 10% of the ore vein. I still have other things to do. Steel Plume and Fire Plume didn't suspect anything. They cupped their fists at Zhuo and left. Zhuo also returned the way he came and arrived at the place where he found the special grade Heavenly Dao Origin Crystal. Zhuo didn't immediately take action. Instead, he used his divine sense to follow the entrance of the mine and continuously extend it until he reached the end of the mine. Only then did he discover that this mine was extremely long. Even though his divine sense was powerful enough, he could still barely reach the end of the mine. Zhuo took a deep breath. His eyes were filled with fanaticism and excitement. He knew that the value of this ore vein had far exceeded his expectations. Although he had already deduced the direction of the Devourer King's internal space evolving into a major world, he knew that it would take time to completely transform it into a major world. Right now, he could only use the minor world he obtained from Steel Plume. Moreover, he also knew that as long as the Devourer King's internal space successfully transformed, it would surpass any minor world in the Xian-Mi heavenly region. Moreover, from the Devourer King's memories, it seemed that the previous Devourer Kings had never tried to transform their internal space into a major world. This was an unprecedented attempt. I must uproot this ore vein and store it in my minor world. Zhuo came back to his senses. Soon after, his power surged into his divine sense. At the same time, he continuously used his soul kill power. Borrowing the power of his divine sense, he formed a huge net-like object. Then, he began to slowly pull the load. Boom, boom, boom. While the ore vein was being pulled, the entire passage began to tremble violently. At the same time, ear-piercing rumbling sounds could be heard. Zhuo's expression remained calm. He forcefully activated his divine sense. Immediately, the trembling around him became even more intense. At the same time, the head of the ore vein began to be slowly pulled out. 3 days later, Zhuo's forehead was covered in sweat. He had finally pulled out the entire special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal vein and barely managed to store it in his minor world. Looking at the mountain-like special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal vein in his minor world, Zhuo revealed an excited smile. With so many special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal veins in his possession, Zhuo knew that he could establish an incomparably powerful force. Even if he didn't establish a force, he wouldn't have to worry about not having enough resources for his cultivation in the future. After putting away the ore vein, Zhuo sent a message to Fire Plume and Steel Plume. After receiving their location, Zhuo rushed towards Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Fire Plume and Steel Plume were currently in a mountain range. The two of them had already excavated all the special-grade Heavenly Law Origin Crystal veins. Seeing Zhuo come over, Steel Plume did not hesitate to cut off 10% of the ore vein and handed it over to Zhuo. Zhuo did not refuse. After putting the 10% of the ore vein into his minor world, he looked around and said, "There are still many unknown places in the Origin Land, but this place is also full of unknown dangers. Do the two of you still plan to go deeper?" Zhuo knew very well that the Origin Land was very large, but he also knew that the most important thing in this place was the Stone of Origin. Now that he had obtained the Stone of Origin as well as many resources, he did not plan to stay any longer. Fire Plume and Steel Plume also understood Zhuo's meaning and shook their heads, not intending to continue exploring. Chapter 2670. The 9-storied pagoda. At least they were already very satisfied. Now that they knew the entrance to the Origin grounds, they could explore it again in the future. There was no need to go deeper now. After all, they had personally experienced the dangers here. "Let's go. I know the route to the exit. Just follow me," Zhuo said as he took the lead and rushed forward. The route given by the Pangu banner not only included the route to enter the Origin grounds, but also the route to leave. Although Fire Plume and Steel Plume were puzzled, they had no choice but to believe in Zhuo. "Brother Zhuo, where are your two friends?" Steel Plume asked along the way. Zhuo's heart sank. He shook his head and said, "I've already sent a message to them, but I didn't get a reply." Originally, Zhuo and Bloodscale had a master-servant contract, so they could sense each other to a certain extent. However, after Zhuo obtained the Origin Stone, the connection between him and Bloodscale suddenly disappeared. This meant that Bloodscale had died, or that someone had taken the initiative to remove the master-servant contract. If anyone had the ability to remove the connection, Zhuowen felt that it should be the green-haired mummy. Of course, Bloodscale was also very likely to have died in the origin grounds. After all, Bloodscale's strength was far from recovered. It was very normal for him to encounter danger in the origin grounds and die. As Zhuowen followed the route given by the Pangu banner and approached the destination, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. To be more precise, he realized that the moment he arrived at the destination, there was a huge discrepancy between the information given to him by the Pangu banner. According to the information given by the Pangu banner, there should be a transmission array at the end of the route. Moreover, the location was remote and extremely inconspicuous. When Zhuowen arrived at the destination, what he saw was not a remote corner, but a huge open space. In the middle of this open space stood a huge tower that was impossible to reach. The tower was surrounded by a dense demonic aura. It was purple-black in color, as if it was real. It was swimming around the tower like fish. The tower had 9 floors, and each floor had 9 windows. In the dim light of every window, there seemed to be a figure hanging there. Zhuowen stopped in his tracks. He looked at the 9-storied pagoda in front of him with a bewildered expression. What is this? What a dense demonic aura. This thing doesn't belong to the human race at all. Fire Plume's beautiful eyes were filled with shock as she looked at the 9-story pagoda in front of her. Although Steel Plume didn't say anything, it was clear from his serious expression that Steel Plume was no less shocked than Fire Plume. Zhuowen's eyes were gloomy. His divine sense passed through the tower's windows, and when it reached inside, he found that there were corpses hanging from each window. Moreover, none of the corpses belonged to the human race. Some of them had the body of a lion, the head of an ox, the tail of a snake, the head of a dog, the body of a human, the winged man, and so on. Moreover, the corpses that appeared in the 9-story pagoda all exuded an aura that made Zhuowen tremble with fear. Zhuowen could not imagine how terrifying and powerful these corpses were when they were alive to possess such a powerful aura even after death. Zhuowen soon noticed the top floor of the pagoda. At the top of the pagoda, Zhuowen found 2 figures slowly crawling towards the top of the pagoda. Zhuowen was no stranger to these 2 figures. They were the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale. The moment he saw Bloodscale, Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He knew that Bloodscale had completely broken off their master-servant relationship. As for why the master-servant contract on Bloodscale was broken, it probably had something to do with the green-haired mummy. The moment he discovered these 2 people, Zhuowen also discovered that there was a round bead emitting a faint blue light inlaid on the top of the pagoda. The light in this dark space was all emitted from this round bead. The faint blue light emitted a strange aura and sound, giving people a sense of coldness. Zhuowen could tell at a glance that this round bead was extraordinary. He also faintly felt that this round bead had an inseparable connection with the pagoda. Once this round bead was taken away, something terrible would happen to the pagoda. Thinking of this, Zhuowen jumped up and rushed towards the top of the pagoda. However, the moment he reached the top of the pagoda, he felt an unprecedented gravity crushing his body, causing him to fall down involuntarily. Zhuowen finally understood why the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale wanted to climb up the pagoda. The gravity was too strong. Even if Zhuowen used all his skills, he couldn't rely on his divine power to fly up. He could only climb up like a mortal. The 2 of you, don't touch that round bead. With no other choice, Zhuowen could only shout loudly, hoping to stop the 2 corpses from approaching the bead. The green-haired mummy and Bloodscale paused for a moment and looked down at Zhuowen. Then, they turned around and continued climbing. Zhuowen's face was gloomy. He knew that the green-haired mummy should know the origin of this pagoda. Moreover, this guy should have come to the origin grounds for this pagoda. Although Zhuowen wanted to stop the 2, he knew that he couldn't make it in time. He could only watch as the green-haired mummy walked to the top of the pagoda and reached out to take down the round bead. The moment the round bead was taken down, the temperature of the entire space suddenly dropped. A dull atmosphere filled the air, as if the surrounding atmosphere was suddenly suppressed by some invisible force. Zhuowen's face changed drastically. He quickly pulled Fire Plume and Steel Plume back. The green-haired mummy at the top of the pagoda grabbed Bloodscale and threw him away. Then, Zhuowen saw Bloodscale scream and explode into a cloud of blood mist. The green-haired mummy took advantage of the moment when Bloodscale exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Then, it completely left the pagoda and rushed into the darkness behind the pagoda. Soon, it disappeared. Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy that had already disappeared and cursed in his heart. He was sure that Bloodscale was used by the green-haired mummy as a scapegoat in the end. However, Zhuowen didn't have so many thoughts. Instead, he focused on the 9-story pagoda in front of him. Ever since the bead was taken down from the top of the tower, Zhuowen clearly felt that the surrounding atmosphere had become much more oppressive. It was as if something invisible was pressing down on his heart, causing his heart to beat faster and he to feel suffocated. It was as if a terrifying force was about to be released by this 9-story pagoda. Roar! Roar! Then, a heart-palpitating roar erupted from the 9-story pagoda. Chapter 2671. Chapter 2671 New YORK Crisis. Let's go. Zhuowen didn't dare to stay any longer. The uneasiness in his heart urged him to leave this place immediately. Therefore, he immediately regained his senses and pulled Steel Plume and Fire Plume towards the passage behind them. He knew that the darkness behind the 9-story pagoda, which was the direction the green-haired corpse had gone, should be the exit to the land of origin. However, he didn't dare to approach the 9-story pagoda. He was afraid that once he got close to the pagoda, he might not be able to return. Fortunately, the Pangu banner didn't only give him one exit. There was still another one. However, it was said that the teleportation array at this exit was somewhat damaged, and the teleportation effect would be slightly different. It could be said that the teleportation array was risky. However, compared to the terrifying 9-story pagoda, Zhuowen felt that this little risk was still acceptable. Roar! 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 As Zhuowen continued to flee, Zhuowen discovered that the roars behind him were getting sharper and more terrifying. Every time the roars reached his ears, they seemed to be able to shake his soul, causing it to tremble. Fire Plume and Steel Plume also reacted and followed closely behind Zhuowen. Hearing the terrifying roars behind them with lingering fear, they asked, "Brother Zhuo, what exactly is that 9-story pagoda behind us? It seems like some terrifying existence has been born inside." Zhuowen shook his head and said uneasily, "I don't know what it is either. However, I know that it's definitely an inauspicious thing inside. Now that the bead that sealed this inauspicious thing has been taken away, the thing inside should be coming out soon. We can't fight it, otherwise, we'll die a horrible death." Fire Plume and Steel Plume nodded repeatedly. Although they hadn't come into contact with the existence inside the 9-story pagoda, they could tell from the terrifying roars that the thing inside was definitely not something they could deal with. Zhuowen was already cursing the green-haired corpse in his heart. If he had known that this green-furred corpse was here to cause trouble, he wouldn't have allowed it to follow him. Now, this guy had entered the land of origin and released an unknown powerful creature. This was a trap for him. "Brother Zhuo, the exit should be behind the 9-story pagoda, right? If we go back now, won't we be trapped inside?" Fire Plume was extremely intelligent. She quickly recalled the direction that the green-furred corpse had fled in and revealed a worried expression. "Don't worry, I know of another exit, but the teleportation array at that exit isn't complete. The teleportation might not be very effective, so," Zhuowen said. "We can only try our best now." Steel Plume smiled bitterly. Zhuowen nodded and remained silent. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, a thunderous sound came from behind. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He grabbed Fire Plume and Steel Plume and threw out a punch. The full power of the 2-star Pangu sacred body was unleashed. Boom! The fist force collided with the astral wind behind him. Zhuowen's expression suddenly changed. The astral wind was so terrifying that it made Zhuowen feel as small as a mortal facing a towering mountain. Zhuowen then spat out a mouthful of blood. He immediately grabbed Fire Plume and Steel Plume and kept retreating. They continued to flee into the depths of the land of origin. Zhuoan didn't even have time to see what had attacked him. After throwing out a punch, he only thought of running away. He had a hunch that once the unknown thing behind him caught up, it would be difficult for him to escape. Fortunately, after Zhuoan threw out a punch, the unknown thing behind him seemed to be afraid of the power of Zhuoan's Pangu sacred body. It didn't chase too closely and followed closely behind Zhuoan. In the process of escaping, Zhuoan immediately swallowed a healing elixir. However, he didn't stop or slow down at all. He was afraid that if he slowed down, the thing behind him would catch up. Fire Plume and Steel Plume were already scared out of their wits. Although Steel Plume was strong, he could feel that the thing behind him was much stronger than them. He didn't have the courage to fight at all. Zhuoan only dared to attack because he felt that the Pangu sacred body had a restraining effect on the thing behind him. That was why Zhuoan dared to attack. However, Zhuoan neglected the fact that the thing behind him was so powerful. Even if the thing was afraid of Zhuoan's Pangu sacred body, it could still seriously injure Zhuoan. Zhuoan no longer dared to stop and fight with the thing behind him. Instead, he ran desperately. Soon, Zhuoan followed the route in his mind and came to another exit. It was an extremely remote stone room. The stone room even looked a little dilapidated. It was obvious that no one had used it for a long time. On the floor of the stone room, there was an extremely complicated magic array. This magic array was a teleportation array. However, there was a hole in the upper left corner of the teleportation array. The hole was very small. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. Obviously, this teleportation array had a flaw. Although it was very small, it had a great impact on the teleportation effect. Zhuoan's face was a little ugly. He was a divine array master, so he had a much deeper understanding of teleportation arrays than ordinary people. The teleportation array was the most complicated and rigorous magic array. There was absolutely no room for any flaws. Even a small flaw would cause irreparable consequences. It would have a profound impact on the teleportation effect. There was a small hole in the teleportation array in front of him. Zhuoan knew that even if it could be activated, there would be a big problem with the teleportation. The biggest problem was that he might be crushed into pieces by the spacetime during the teleportation process before he could be teleported out. However, he had no choice now. The thing behind him was getting closer and closer. He couldn't afford to waste too much time. I can only fight with my life on the line, Zhuoan sighed. He immediately took out a supreme-grade godstone and placed it on the teleportation array. He immediately activated the teleportation array. Blazing light spread around the teleportation array. Then, the teleportation array enveloped Zhuoan, Fire Plume, and Steel Plume. With a flash of light, the three of them disappeared on the spot. At the same time, the stone room was blasted to pieces. A huge black shadow that was over 30 meters tall charged in from the outside. This black shadow had scarlet eyes. It had a lion's body and a human face. Its huge palms slammed into the ground, causing the ground to tremble as if there was an earthquake. If Zhuoan was here, he would definitely recognize this monster with a lion's body and a human face. Wasn't it one of the 81 corpses in the 9-story tower? In the cold starry sky, an invisible ripple appeared. Then, a figure appeared out of thin air. Chapter 2672. Eastern Emperor Tai, the land of origin, still suppresses the corpses of the 99 great sorcerers. These poor great sorcerers were all legendary figures in the world before they died, but after they died, they were refined into a 9-story demon tower and suppressed by the demon pearl forever. But now this demon pearl is mine. With this demon pearl, I can recover half of my strength. When I go to the untainted heavenly realm, I will teach those ignorant juniors a lesson. 12 great sorcerers. I will take care of the untainted heavenly realm in the future. When I take control of the untainted heavenly realm, I will attack the Xianmi heavenly realm and destroy the scum of the human race. The green-haired mummy laughed and disappeared. As for Zhuoan, the green-haired mummy thought, he was dead for sure. Although it was a pity that Zhuoan had the Pangu banner, The mummy's strength was not enough now. If he went in again, he might not be able to get out. At the former site of the Six Desires heavenly domain, in the sealed land that led to the eldritch heavenly domain, a bald man in a loose robe was forming a seal with his hands. Mysterious lines flew out from his palms and landed on the sealed land. The light of the lines gradually disappeared, and the bald man looked at the seal he had cast with satisfaction. He smiled slightly and said, "With my lifetime of array Tao, unless someone at the third step of Tao confirmation comes, they won't be able to break this seal." The bald man admired the seal in front of him with satisfaction. Then, he turned his head and looked at the distant starry sky. A stream of light came from the distant starry sky. It was extremely fast and soon landed in the bald man's palm. It was a glittering flying sword. A flying sword message? "The third prince is here too. And he is in the great Brahma heavenly realm." The bald man put away the flying sword message and frowned slightly. The bald man was Master Yuan Hui, the eternal level formation master sent by the Huangji family in the Xian Mi heavenly realm. A divine array master of this level, even in the Xian Mi heavenly domain, was a highly regarded existence. Even Tao Palace level forces had to be respectful to such an existence and did not dare to slight them. The third prince mentioned by Master Yuan Hui was the third son of the head of the Huangji family. The bald man frowned because the third prince was truly a hedonistic son of a wealthy family. Although the third prince's talent was indeed very good, he did not like to cultivate. What he did every day was to seek pleasure and pleasure in front of him. Even so, the third prince's cultivation base had been nurtured by the rich resources of the Huangji family, so he had successfully attained the Tao and become a Tao Yuan master. Of course, a Tao Yuan master like the third prince, who relied on resources to forcefully advance, was naturally much weaker than an ordinary Tao Yuan master. However, the third prince had the support of the Huangji aristocratic family. Usually, he did not need to do anything in a battle. The experts sent by the Huangji aristocratic family would help him settle it. Forget it, the matter of the seal has been resolved. Let's go take a look at the third prince. Perhaps he might bring us some news from the Huangji family. It would be best if you have specific information about the land of origin. Master Yuan Hui shook his head, put away the flying sword, and left the place. Not long after Master Yuan Hui left, the green-haired mummy came to a place not far from the seal. When the green-haired mummy saw the seal that led to the eldritch heavenly realm, he frowned and said coldly, "Someone actually strengthened the seal here. Fortunately, it's only an eternal level seal. If it's a seal that surpasses the eternal level, I'm afraid I won't be able to go to the eldritch heavenly realm." The green-haired mummy did not immediately break the seal. He was not good at seals. He found a remote meteorite near the seal, opened up a cave, and planned to go into seclusion. He planned to absorb all the energy of the demon pearl. After his strength recovered to a certain extent, he would forcibly break the seal here. The blue earth was now shrouded in a huge demonic aura. An incomparably huge pagoda appeared in the Kunlun mountain range of earth. This huge pagoda covered the sky and floated above the earth, causing countless creatures on the earth to panic. However, other than emitting a horrifying roar, the huge tower did not launch any attacks. Even so, the extremely massive demonic aura had affected countless living beings on Earth. This huge pagoda floated above the Earth for about 3 days, then broke through the sky and left. Wherever this huge pagoda passed, a terrifying demonic aura filled the air. In a short time, the entire Huaxia heavenly realm was shrouded in demonic aura. The creatures affected by the demonic aura gradually found that their physical strength was constantly increasing. Whether it was mortals or cultivators, they could clearly feel the changes in their physiques. However, some people also found that their minds were becoming more and more blurred while their physiques were changing. Cultivators were better off as their willpower was stronger, so they could still retain their rationality. However, some mortals were completely affected by the demonic aura and lost their rationality. But as the demonic aura became denser, cultivators were also gradually affected by it. They lost their rationality and became monsters that only knew how to kill. Moreover, these monsters that had lost their rationality were in awe and fear of the 9-story pagoda floating in the Huaxia heavenly realm. As long as it was an order from the celestial wizard corps in the 9-story pagoda, these monsters would not resist. Outside the Huaxia heavenly realm, Zhuowen barely managed to stabilize his body. His face was pale, but his eyes were staring blankly at the scene in front of him. The entire Huaxia heavenly realm is controlled by that 9-story pagoda? What the hell is that? Zhuowen was in disbelief. Fire Plume and Steel Plume also appeared behind Zhuowen in a sorry state. The two of them also looked at the Huaxia heavenly realm that was shrouded in demonic aura and could not be seen clearly. Is that the legendary demonic pagoda in the land of origin? Is it the demonic pagoda that was refined by the legendary great wizard Donghuang Tai? Fire Plume said in shock. Donghuang Tai? Zhuowen looked at Fire Plume in confusion. Fire Plume calmed down and said calmly, ever since Pangu created the universe and turned it into the starry sky, we entered the desolate era. In that era, there were hundreds of races, but only 3 races were the most powerful. These 3 races are the human race, the wizard race, and the monster race. The human race and the wizard race fought and split the desolate heavenly realm, which became the Xian Mi heavenly realm. Although the wizard race was weakened during the conflict with the human race, they are still in charge of the desolate heavenly realm. Only the monster race disappeared during that conflict. However, I once heard that the monster race once had a shocking genius named Donghuang Tai. This Donghuang Tai was extremely daring. He secretly collected the corpses of great wizards in the desolate era and refined them into corpse puppets. He collected them into his natal demonic artifact, the 9-story pagoda. Chapter 2673. Ragefire Plume let out a sigh. Brother Zhuo, if I'm not wrong, there should be a great monster like the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi slumbering in the land of origin. Now that the green-furred corpse has taken the demonic pearl, the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi has awakened. I'm afraid that the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi is planning to revive the monster race with the 8 heavens as his base. Zhuo Wen's heart trembled. He had seen the terror of one of the corpse puppets in the 9-floored tower. He was no match for it. Not to mention that there were 81 corpse puppets in the 9-floored tower and there was the even more terrifying Eastern Emperor Tai Yi. Zhuo Wen knew that he was no match for the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi. He would be sending himself to his death. It won't be long before the 8 heavens turn into a monster realm. Adding on the fact that the great desolate heavenly realm is eyeing us, we can't stay here any longer. Brother Zhuo, why don't you come with us to the Xian Mi heavenly realm? Steel Plume persuaded. That's the only thing we can do now. I can only rely on the 2 of you to go to the heavenly moat. Zhuo Wen cupped his fists. Fire Plume and Steel Plume naturally agreed. Zhuo Wen had saved them twice and Zhuo Wen was very strong. His talent must be terrifying. If he went with them to the heavenly moat, they would have the chance to invite Zhuo Wen to join their purple-red house. At that time, their purple-red house would have a chance to rise again. Zhuo Wen took a final look at the Huaxia heavenly realm that had turned into a monster realm. He had a feeling that the 8 heavens would be in chaos soon. He had to return to the great Brahma heavenly realm immediately and bring Chen Shui and his friends away from this place. Amidst the rolling demonic qi, the 9-story tower floated quietly. Inside the tower, a man in a black robe sat cross-legged. His entire body was wrapped in black cloth, and only a pair of bright eyes could be seen. I've finally awakened. I, the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi, will revive the monster race. Also, where did the person who woke me up come from? He has an aura that is even more ancient than mine. Forget it, forget it. Although the demonic pearl is very important to me, since it was this person who woke me up, then there's no harm in taking the demonic pearl as a reward. Donghuang Tai closed his eyes again and activated the 9-storied pagoda, spreading it toward the other heavens. The 8 heavens had long been his territory. When he woke up, it would be time to transform this place. At that time, he would turn this place into a demon realm and make it his territory. Once the demon domain was formed, Donghuang Tai would have the capital to fight against the Xian Mi heavenly domain and the prehistoric heavenly domain. At that time, he would not have to be chased out of the prehistoric heavenly domain like a stray dog. As for Zhuowen and the others, they were like ants in his eyes. Since he had not killed them previously, he naturally would not make a move to hunt down ant-like fellows. Zhuoan worked day and night and finally arrived at the borders of the Great Brahma region. However, Zhuoan felt extremely uneasy in his heart. This was because after he had sent a message to Mu Chunxue, he had not received any response from Mu Chunxue. Zhuoan had even sent a message to Tong Chimei, Magatama, Uezu, and the others, but there was no response. This made Zhuoan have a faint premonition. When Zhuoan arrived near the Wen Shui Palace, he found that the stone statue that everyone had built had collapsed. The Wen Shui Palace, which was originally bustling with noise and excitement, had become extremely deserted. What happened? Fire Plume looked at the deserted surroundings and her beautiful eyes were also filled with surprise. Big Brother Zhuo. Suddenly, a soft cry attracted Zhuoan's attention. He saw that in a dilapidated meteorite not far from the Wen Shui Palace, a figure covered in black cloth was looking in Zhuoan's direction. Zhuoan landed beside the figure and realized that the figure covered in black cloth was Tong Chimei. When Zhuoan was about to speak, he was pulled by Tong Chimei. Then, they flew away from the Wen Shui Palace. However, their path was quickly blocked by two figures. How dare you? His Majesty the Crown Prince has already instructed that without his permission, no one is allowed to come near here. You are simply. One of the two figures was a thin and tall man. His voice was a little sharp. However, before he could finish his words, he stared blankly at the white-clothed youth beside Tong Chimei. He could not finish his words. The moment Zhuoan saw the two people in front of him, killing intent surged in his eyes. Because these two people were two of the 20 heavenly Tao masters who had submitted to him back then. These two people were already his servants, yet they still dared to berate his people like this. They had nothing to fear. You are courting death. Zhuoan snorted coldly and immediately communicated with his mind, intending to destroy their souls. However, Zhuoan quickly realized that although he communicated with his mind, the two people in front of him were safe and sound. Haha, His Majesty the Crown Prince was right. The slave contract that this person placed on us is no longer effective. Quickly inform His Majesty the Crown Prince. The thin and tall man was ecstatic. He immediately took out a talisman and crushed it. Then, the two of them immediately retreated, not daring to get too close to Zhuoan. At that time, Zhuoan had single-handedly fought more than 40 heavenly Tao masters. What kind of grace was that? Until now, it was deeply imprinted in their memories. They did not dare to fight such an expert head-on. Zhuoan's eyes were filled with killing intent. He immediately took out the sacrificial death sword. His powerful consciousness even executed the soul kill, causing the two people's minds to go blank for a moment. Then, the sacrificial death sword instantly pierced through their foreheads and destroyed their souls. Big Brother Zhuo, let's run. It will be too late if we don't leave now. After Zhuoan killed the two heavenly Tao masters, Tong Chimei did not show the slightest bit of joy. Instead, she was deeply worried and urged Zhuoan to leave. Zhuoan placed his right hand on Tong Chimei's shoulder. When he wanted to calm her down, his expression changed drastically, and he removed the veil on Tong Chimei's face. Tong Chimei cried out in shock. Unfortunately, her hand was not as fast as Zhuoan's. After the black veil fell, a face covered in scars appeared in front of Zhuoan's eyes. Although Tong Chimei could not be considered beautiful, she had a heroic spirit, and her appearance was even better. However, Tong Chimei's heroic face no longer existed. Instead, it was replaced by an ugly face covered in scars. Moreover, Zhuoan could sense that the scars on Tong Chimei's face contained the aura of the Tao. With Tong Chimei's strength, it was impossible for her to heal the scars. Clearly, someone had intentionally left the scars on Tong Chimei's face. Chimei, who did this? The anger in Zhuoan's heart could not be contained. To a woman, appearance was the most important thing. It was the same for cultivators. Now, Tong Chimei's appearance was ruined. Zhuoan even found that the divine power in Tong Chimei's body was so weak that it was negligible. He knew that Tong Chimei's cultivation had also been destroyed. Chapter 2674. Huangji family Tong Chimay quickly lowered her head, not daring to look at Zhuowen. She secretly wiped her tears and said, "Big brother Zhuo, let's go. The prince that those two were talking about is not someone we can afford to offend. They are too strong." Fire Plume and Steel Plume followed behind Zhuowen. When they heard Tong Chimay's words, they seemed to have thought of something and their expressions changed. Fire Plume quickly asked, "Miss Tong, the prince you mentioned, could it be the prince of the Huangji family?" Tong Chimay nodded and said, "Yes, when that prince came, he said that he was the third prince of the Huangji family. Moreover, the people around the third prince are too strong. I heard that there is a bodyguard of the Master of Destiny, who is already a powerhouse in the second step of the Tao-confirming realm. He is an existence that can cover the sky with one hand." Fire Plume and Steel Plume's expressions changed. They never thought that the third prince of the Huangji family would also come here. This fellow was a famous playboy in the host region. Moreover, he was ruthless and cynical. Moreover, this fellow had a terrifying powerhouse like the Master of Destiny by his side. This kind of powerhouse could kill them as easily as flipping his hand. "Brother Zhuo, we have to leave this place quickly. The third prince of the Huangji family is not someone we can afford to offend," Fire Plume quickly said. Zhuowen took a deep breath and ignored Fire Plume. Instead, he looked at Tong Chimay and said, "Chimay, where is Chen Shui?" Tong Chimay's expression changed and she said with a bit of disappointment, "When the third prince came to the Great Brahma region, he was fine and didn't make any big movements. However, elder sister Chen Shui had just broken through and a phoenix phenomenon appeared. Then the third prince muttered about the phoenix bloodline, so he captured elder sister Chen Shui." Geji. Zhuowen clenched his fist and said 3 words in a row. However, the killing intent in his eyes became even stronger. She actually possesses the phoenix bloodline. Furthermore, after breaking through, she was able to produce a phoenix vision. If the phoenix people of the primitive heaven domain were to find out about this, they would probably worship her as a goddess, Fire Plume said with a strange look in her eyes. Zhuowen did not think too much about the phoenix people that Fire Plume mentioned. He looked at Tong Chimay and asked, "Chimay, where is Chen Shui right now?" "Haha, in this prince's golden house. Amir and actually has the right to show such anger to this crown prince." An untimely voice sounded. Soon after, Zhuowen's group was surrounded by over a dozen figures. At the front of the encirclement, a man dressed in a golden threaded robe was sitting on a splendid carriage, flying through the air. The 2 drivers in front of the carriage were 2 white-haired old men. However, from the light in their eyes, it could be seen that these 2 old men were not simple people. Zhuowen could tell with a single glance that these 2 old men should be at the primordial Chaos Lord level. As for the people around them, they were the people that Zhuowen had subdued in the past. The man sitting in the carriage was naturally the Huangji family's third prince, Huang Ziyi that Fire Plume had mentioned. In the carriage, Huang Ziyi casually picked up a grape beside him and put it into his mouth. He completely ignored Zhuowen and looked at Tong Chimay who was beside Zhuowen. Zhuowen's aura was too weak. He was only in the life and death boundary. This kind of cultivation was like an ant in Huang Ziyi's eyes. He was too lazy to even spare him a glance. "Little beauty, how did you escape when I wasn't paying attention? I still have many methods that I haven't used on you yet. Do you hate me that much? Once I'm hated, I'll lose my mind. At that time, I don't know what I'll do to you." Huang Ziyi looked at Tong Chimay with a teasing look in his eyes. His voice was even more unrestrained. Tong Chimay trembled in fear. She clearly remembered the scene of her falling into Huang Ziyi's hands. Zhuowen coldly looked at Huang Ziyi and said, "Chen Shui is in your hands. And the scar on Chimay's body was also caused by you?" Huang Ziyi indifferently glanced at Zhuowen. Then he waved his hand and said, "All of you, attack. This ant is too noisy. Kill him to shut him up." Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Although those people were a little afraid of Zhuowen, they were more afraid of Huang Ziyi. After all, Huang Ziyi's fierce reputation was out there. As people from the Eastern Path region of the Xianmi heavenly domain, they had naturally heard of him. Compared to Zhuowen, they were even more unwilling to offend Huang Ziyi. Zhuowen took a step forward. The Thunderfire sword, blood immortal sword, and death sacrifice sword swept out at the same time. They turned into 3 streams of light that constantly danced. At this moment, Zhuowen did not hold back at all. The 3 heavenly Dao-grade divine swords were like weapons of death. Every time they danced, they would reap a life. Soon, those people were all killed by Zhuowen. Huang Ziyi narrowed his eyes and finally glanced at Zhuowen. He said, "An ant at the life and death boundary can actually kill a heavenly Dao master. It seems like your talent is not bad. How about this? I'll give you a chance. Kneel before me and be my dog, and I won't kill you today. Moreover, I'll even give you a chance to enter the Huangji clan and let you have a great fortune." Huang Ziyi glanced at Zhuowen from above. It was as if having Zhuowen become his dog was a great honor for Zhuowen. Fire Plume frowned. She felt that Huang Ziyi's words were too arrogant. In her opinion, a genius like Zhuowen needed to be taken seriously even if he entered a Dao Palace level force. This Huang Ziyi actually wanted him to be a dog. He was too arrogant. However, Fire Plume did not dare to refute Huang Ziyi. After all, he had 2 primordial chaos experts protecting him. Moreover, he had the Huangji clan behind him. Fire Plume did not dare to say anything. Huang Ziyi did not mind Zhuowen's silence. He looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and said indifferently, "Fire Plume from the Purple Red House?" Fire Plume did not dare to be negligent. She cupped her hands and said, "Yes. The 2 of you are in cahoots with this ant?" Huang Ziyi asked casually. However, there was a trace of killing intent and hostility in Huang Ziyi's words. Fire Plume and Steel Plume naturally felt the hostility in Huang Ziyi's tone. They could imagine that if they said that they were with Zhuowen, Huang Ziyi would not let them off easily. Zhuowen looked coldly at Fire Plume and Steel Plume. In his opinion, Fire Plume and Steel Plume would not admit to being with him. After all, the force behind Huang Ziyi was too strong. Fire Plume and Steel Plume would not take such a risk. However, to Zhuowen's surprise, Fire Plume openly admitted to being with him and even pleaded with Huang Ziyi. "Crown Prince Huang Ziyi, Zhuowen is a disciple of our Purple Red House. He did not know your identity just now. I hope you won't forgive him. We will immediately take him away from here," Fire Plume said in a neither servile nor overbearing tone. Steel Plume's eyes flashed with worry, but he did not say anything. He knew that Fire Plume had already made up her mind. There was no point in him saying anything. Chapter 2675. Huang Ziyi. Fire Plume, you've got guts. Although your Purple Red House is strong, it's nothing in front of my Huangji family. If our Huangji family wants to destroy your Purple Red House, we only need to move our fingers. I'm in a bad mood right now. If you don't want to die, accompany me for a year and be my maid. Then, I'll set you free." Huang Ziyi sneered. Fire Plume's face turned cold. She took a few steps back with Steel Plume. Zhuowen slowly took a step forward. He looked at Huang Ziyi and said, "Didn't I just ask you a question? Are you ignoring my words now?" Huang Ziyi was stunned. He looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. He didn't expect that this ant in front of him would have the courage to preach to him. Was he courting death? But soon, a cruel smile appeared on Huang Ziyi's face. He said to the old man on the right, "Old White, kill this arrogant brat." The old man called Old White didn't say a word. He stomped his right foot and flew towards Zhuowen like a great rock spreading its wings. Old White's right hand turned into a claw. She swirled around him like a hunting hawk as he grabbed at Zhuowen. "Be careful." Huo Yu's expression changed slightly. Old White was a master of primordial chaos. Although Zhuowen was strong, she didn't think that Zhuowen would be able to gain much of an advantage against such a master. Steel Plume's eyes lit up. He remembered that Zhuowen had destroyed the flaming bat in the origin ground. If Zhuowen used that move, he might be able to kill Old White. However, Steel Plume could also see that Zhuowen's move was his final trump card, and it consumed a lot of energy. Moreover, Huang Ziyi had more than one Lord of Primordial Chaos beside him. Steel Plume was worried that Zhuowen would be at a disadvantage. Zhuowen's eyes were calm as the 3 divine swords circled around him. He did not use the divine swords to attack. Instead, he took a step forward and punched out with his right fist like a dragon. The power of the 2-star Pangu sacred body burst out. Ka. When Zhuowen's fist finally collided with Old Bai's claw, terrifying ripples spread out. Zhuowen let out a muffled groan and retreated several dozen steps. Every step he took caused the surrounding space to tremble faintly and the laws to become chaotic. Elder Bai's figure swayed, and he took a few steps back. He looked at the white-clothed young man in front of him in shock. He really couldn't imagine how a mere 2 extremes of life and death could withstand his all-out attack. Moreover, Elder Bai faintly discovered that the strength of the white-clothed young man did not come entirely from his divine power, but from his powerful physical body. Huang Zi's expression also changed, but the killing intent in his eyes became even more intense. Initially, I wanted to make an ant like you my dog. But since you don't know what's good for you, you can forget about living then. Old Bai, there's no need to hold back. Kill this ant. Huang Zi said coldly. Elder Bai nodded slightly and shouted softly. He took a step forward, surrounded by Taoist rhymes, and blasted out another claw. The power of Elder Bai's claw was far stronger than before. Obviously, Elder Bai had not exerted all his strength just now. The peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, Steel Plume looked solemn. After Elder Bai exerted all his strength, he finally knew that Elder Bai's cultivation realm was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. It could be said that Elder Bai was far stronger than the ordinary Lord of Primordial Chaos. He was a little worried about whether Zhuowen could deal with Elder Bai. Back then, the Flaming Bat's strength was also at Lord of Primordial Chaos, but it was not at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. It was just a beast and did not have so many means like a cultivator. Now, Elder Bai was a knowledgeable cultivator and his means were much stronger than the Flaming Bat's. Moreover, he was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, which was much stronger than the Flaming Bat's. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He obviously also discovered that Elder Bai was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. At the same time, Zhuowen's attention was fixed on the other old man beside Huang Zi. He knew that this old man should also be at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. Apart from these 2 old men, Zhuowen did not find the Destiny Master expert mentioned by Tong Chimei around Huang Zi. Obviously, that expert might have something to do and was not here. Zhuowen was very confident in his spiritual consciousness. Even if the Heaven's Mandate Master was hiding in the surroundings, his spiritual consciousness would still be able to see everything clearly. Since he could not find anything, it meant that the Heaven's Mandate Master was not around. In other words, as long as he could kill the 2 guards beside Huang Zi who were at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos, Huang Zi would have nothing to rely on. Zhuowen knew very well that with his current 2-star Pangu sacred body, he could at most tangle with Elder Bai. It was unrealistic to kill Elder Bai, who was at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. Unless he used the profound meaning of the Pangu banner. However, he also knew that he only had one chance to use the profound meaning. If he killed Elder Bai, he would inevitably be exhausted. At that time, he would definitely die if he faced another expert at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos. Therefore, Zhuowen's plan was to let the 2 experts at the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos join forces to deal with him. Then, he would use the profound meaning to kill them in one fell swoop. This was his only chance. If he failed, he was afraid that he would have to use the spacetime key to teleport him into the spacetime temple to escape Huang Zi's killing move. Bang! 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 In an instant, Elder Bai, who was wrapped in an even more terrifying power, fiercely collided with Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen's aura was not obvious, his 2-star Pangu sacred body was extremely powerful and terrifying. Although Elder Bai suppressed Zhuowen, he could not defeat Zhuowen at all, let alone kill Zhuowen. The more Huang Zi watched, the more he frowned. In the end, he looked impatiently at Zhuowen and Elder Bai, who were still tangling with each other. He looked at the grey-robed elder on the other side of the carriage and said, "Elder Wu, you also attack together and get rid of this and as soon as possible." The other grey-robed elder nodded and took a step forward. Like a meteor, he he directly hit Zhuowen. The powerful aura of the peak of Lord of Primordial Chaos was released unreservedly from his body. Huang Ziyi, aren't you too despicable? How could you let two peak experts of Lord of Primordial Chaos join forces to deal with a cultivator in the two extremes of life and death? Fire Plume could not help but scold. Huang Ziyi coldly glanced at Fire Plume and said, Fire Plume, even if your father was in front of me, he would not dare to scold me like this. I have changed my mind. When I get rid of this guy, you will be my slave for life. Even if I get tired of playing with you, you will not be able to leave my hand. Fire Plume trembled with anger and fear. Huang Ziyi was famous in the Eastern Path domain of the Xianmi Heavenly Domain for being a cruel playboy. If she really fell into his hands, she would suffer a fate worse than death. At this moment, the grey-robed elder, Elder Wu, had also joined the team besieging Zhuowen. The joint forces of the two peak experts of Lord of Primordial Chaos were so powerful that terrifying energy ripples appeared in the surrounding millions of miles of starry sky. Chapter 2676. Phoenix Bloodline Bang. 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 Old Bai and Old Wu took advantage of the gap and suddenly took a step forward. Their attacks poured down on Zhuowen's body. Zhuowen groaned and retreated continuously. He even spat out a mouthful of blood and his aura became extremely weak. Huang Ziyi sneered and revealed a trace of cruelty when he saw this. Although the white-clothed young man was clearly only at the extremities of life and death, he was very surprised that he could fight against Master Hunyuan at the peak. Even he felt that such a genius was amazing. However, he also knew that a genius who had not been able to grow up was nothing. Didn't he still die without a burial ground under his orders? Thinking of this, Huang Ziyi felt even more complacent. However, what happened next completely stunned Huang Ziyi. Old Bai and the five elders, who had originally repelled Zhuowen and wanted to follow up with a victorious attack to completely eliminate Zhuowen with their next move, suddenly stopped when their attacks were about to land on Zhuowen. Then, the two old men screamed in horror and their bodies were cut in half by a blade of light. Moreover, the moment their bodies were cut in half, their bodies were annihilated into nothingness under the light of the blade of light. They completely disappeared before Huang Ziyi's eyes. What's going on? Huang Ziyi rubbed his eyes. Indeed, Old Bai and Old Wu had disappeared before his eyes just like that. He also discovered that the white-clothed young man Zhuowen's right hand was covered in a layer of blade of light. It was this arm covered in blade of light that had passed through the two old men's bodies and completely killed them in one go. Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood and hurriedly took out several healing pills from his small world. At the same time, he took out a high-grade Heavenly Way origin crystal and circulated his meridians to absorb the energy of the crystal to recover the energy in his body. Earlier, he had been waiting for the moment when Old Bai and Old Wu attacked him together to use the profound Qi blade. The power of the profound Qi blade did not disappoint Zhuowen. It easily killed Old Wu and Old Bai. However, it was extremely taxing on him. It was as if his body was completely drained. Waves of weakness assaulted his mind. Fortunately, he had many Heavenly Way origin crystals on him. When he used the sky-splitting blade earlier, he had used many high-grade Heavenly Way origin crystals to replenish himself. That was how he was able to kill Old Wu and Old Bai in a single strike. Steel Plume, Fire Plume, help me stall Huang Ziyi. Zhuowen hadn't recovered from the moment he killed Old Wu and Old Bai. He had to kill Huang Ziyi before he could react. Right now, he was too weak and did not have the strength to fight, so he could only ask for help from Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Steel Plume and Fire Plume also knew the severity of the situation. They knew that they had thoroughly offended Huang Ziyi and were now on the same boat as Zhuowen. They had to keep Huang Ziyi alive. Otherwise, if Huang Ziyi returned alive, they and the purple-red chamber behind them would be finished. After all, the Huang Ji family was too big and much stronger than the purple-red chamber. They could not afford to offend them. You dare! Huang Ziyi looked at Steel Plume and Fire Plume who were blocking his way. His face changed slightly and he trembled with anger. Because Huang Zedi's cultivation was forcefully raised with resources and he did not have much combat experience, he was quickly subdued by Steel Plume. Even the spirit ring on his hand was taken away by Steel Plume. "Brother Zhuo, this is your spoil. Take it." Steel Plume took Huang Zedi's spirit ring and handed it to Zhuoan. Zhuoan nodded and accepted the spirit ring without hesitation. He was the one who killed Old Bai and Old Wu, so this spoil of war belonged to him. Therefore, he did not refuse. However, when he checked Huang Zedi's spirit ring, Zhuoan sucked in a breath of cold air. He found that Huang Zedi's spirit ring also contained a miniature world. Moreover, Huang Zedi's miniature world was much bigger than the one given to him by Steel Plume. The laws inside were also much more complete and advanced. Zhuoan even saw countless greenery in this miniature world. It was actually full of vitality. Zhuoan did not hesitate to replace the miniature world given to him by Steel Plume. He then erased Huang Zedi's imprint on this miniature world and put Huang Zedi's spirit ring on his finger. Huang Zi was extremely wealthy. Zhuoan saw countless precious divine medicines and materials in Huang Zedi's miniature world. These divine medicines were much more than the ones he had seen before. Zhuoan knew that these divine medicines were enough for him to join forces and advance to the primordial chaos level. After all, with so many divine medicines and the Emperor Pilfire's alchemy Dao comprehension, he would really be a pig if he couldn't advance to the primordial chaos level. Moreover, Zhuoan also found that there were many top-notch escape talismans in Huang Zedi's miniature world. If Huang Zi used these talismans, Zhuoan might not be able to catch him. Obviously, Huang Zi had no combat experience at all. After Old Wu and Old Bai were killed, he immediately panicked and didn't even think of taking out an escape talisman to escape. Of course, this also gave Zhuoan the opportunity to capture this fellow. Otherwise, if Huang Zi managed to escape, it would definitely be a huge disaster for them. "How dare you? Why aren't you letting me go? Do you want to offend the Huang Ji family?" Huang Zi panicked and his voice was filled with panic. Since his debut, this was the first time he was caught in such a sorry state. "Pa!" Zhuoan came over and slapped Huang Zi, causing the latter to be stunned. Zhuoan held Huang Zi in one hand and said to Tong Chimei, "Chimei, do you know where Chen Shui is locked up?" Tong Chimei quickly said, "I know, but the place where elder sister Chen Shui is locked up has been sealed by the Master of Destiny. Bring me there first," Zhuoan said. Tong Chimei nodded and brought Zhuoan to the Wen Shui Palace. After a while, Zhuoan and the others arrived at Mu Chunshue's seclusion place. At this moment, Mu Chunshue's seclusion place had long been destroyed and turned into ruins. In the ruins, there were terrifying flames surging. The flames surged and formed an incomparably huge phoenix shadow. The phoenix shadow seemed to be real and even the feathers on the phoenix's surface were clear as if they were real. Moreover, the fire phoenix's aura was extremely powerful, far more powerful than an ordinary master of Heaven's Path. Even an ordinary master of Heaven's Path might not be as powerful as the phoenix shadow. In the phoenix shadow, there was a beautiful figure sitting cross-legged. This beautiful figure was Mu Chunshue. At this moment, Mu Chunshue's Daoist rhymes were flowing around her body. Clearly, she had successfully become a master of Heaven's Path. Moreover, due to the special bloodline in her body, her aura was far from an ordinary master of Heaven's Path. It's indeed the Phoenix bloodline. Moreover, it's such a powerful Phoenix bloodline. If this woman enters the Phoenix people's Nirvana rebirth a few times, she might be even more heaven-defying. Chapter 2677. Zhu Dezhuowen came to the edge of the barrier and used the power of the Pangu sacred body to strike the barrier. He couldn't help but take a few steps back as he looked at the barrier in shock. The power contained in the barrier was far above that of the Hunyuan master. It seemed that Tong Chimei was right. The barrier should have been set up by a Heaven's Mandate master. Zhuowen was glad that the Heaven's Mandate master wasn't by Huang Zedi's side. Otherwise, he would have to fight with his life on the line. Although he still had the mysterious Hu Yi's divine arrow, he really wasn't sure if he could use it with his current strength. Even if he could use it, he would probably be half dead. How do I open this barrier? Zhuowen asked coldly as he lifted Huang Ziyi. Huang Ziyi looked on coldly and sneered, I think you'd better surrender. Not to mention that you can't afford to offend the Huangji clan, you'll all die when Zuda returns. If you don't want to die, let me go and I won't pursue the disrespect you've shown me. Crack. Unfortunately, as soon as Huang Ziyi finished speaking, Zhuowen twisted Huang Ziyi's right arm and said coldly, I'm asking you how to break this barrier. Huang Ziyi screamed in agony, his face pale as he looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. Before Huang Ziyi could react, he broke Huang Ziyi's left arm again. Huang Ziyi's back was covered in cold sweat and his heart was filled with fear. The white-clothed youth in front of him was a madman. He didn't care about the Huangji clan behind him at all. When Zhuowen was about to cripple Huang Ziyi's legs, Huang Ziyi was so frightened that he immediately struggled and said, I can break this barrier, but you have to let me go. Crack. Zhuowen sneered and broke Huang Ziyi's right leg. He said, what right do you have to talk terms with me? If you don't want to continue suffering, then open this barrier. Every time Zhuowen broke Huang Ziyi's limbs, the pain would be magnified in Huang Ziyi's soul, making Huang Ziyi feel as if he was better off dead. Even those with strong willpower could faint from the pain, let alone this cowardly Huang Ziyi. Sure enough, when Zhuowen was about to break Huang Ziyi's left leg, Huang Ziyi's tears flowed down his face as he quickly begged for mercy, indicating that he was willing to open the barrier. Only then did Zhuowen stop. Zhuowen threw Huang Ziyi to the ground. The latter struggled to raise his head and mumbled something that Zhuowen could not understand. After a while, Zhuowen discovered that the barrier around Mu Chunxue was slowly disappearing. Inside the enchantment, Mu Chunxue seemed to feel that the enchantment around her had disappeared. The raging flames gradually converged and merged into her body. Husband. Mu Chunxue opened her eyes. She was pleasantly surprised to find that the person standing in front of her was the Zhuowen she had been thinking about day and night. Zhuowen gently stroked Mu Chunxue's hair and said, Chen Shui, we have to leave this place quickly. Also, where are Xiangjuan, Yuezhu, and Magatama? Other than me, everyone else in Wen Shui Palace was killed by Huang Ziyi. Yuezhu and Magatama are no exception, but little sister Xiangjuan and Palace Master Jingyun went to Xianmi Heavenly Domain with a force from Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Mu Chunshue's beautiful eyes dimmed. She quickly saw Tong Chimei not far away and quickly arrived in front of her. She held Tong Chimei's hands and said in a pleasantly surprised voice, Junior Sister Chimei, you're still here. This is great. But very quickly, Mu Chen Shui discovered that something was wrong. Tong Chimei's cultivation had been crippled, and with her divine sense, she discovered that Tong Chimei's face was covered with many hideous scars. Was this done by Huang Ziyi? Mu Chunshue's expression changed slightly and her beautiful eyes were filled with killing intent. Tong Chimei revealed a sorrowful expression. She only nodded silently. She knew that her cultivation had been crippled and her face was ruined. Her life was over. Zhuowen summoned the space-time roulette and lifted the half-dead Huang Ziyi. Let's leave this place first. This Huang Ziyi still has a master of destiny's bodyguard. We need to leave before that bodyguard returns. Mu Chunxue withdrew her killing intent and nodded. She brought everyone into the space-time roulette. When Zhuowen was about to activate the space-time roulette to leave, a strong sense of unease appeared in his heart. Zhuowen shouted and immediately summoned the Thunder Fire Sword. He ordered Xiao He to control the space-time roulette to leave this place. Zhuowen used all his might to activate the tyrannical Dao slaughtering technique. In the blink of an eye, he used the 3 moves of the slaughtering Dao finger, slaughtering Dao palm and slaughtering Dao hand. However, the moment these 3 moves were used, they were struck by an extremely powerful force. After a moment of stagnation, they completely collapsed and were annihilated. Zhuowen made use of this time and immediately used the space-time rules to disappear from the original space-time. The space-time roulette had already broken through the air and left. Husband. Big brother Zhuo. Before the people on the space-time roulette could react, they saw Zhuowen being completely annihilated by a wave of energy. This power was simply too strong, causing them to not have the slightest thought of resisting. You guys leave first. This person should be Huang Zedi's master of Destiny's bodyguard. It's useless for you guys to stay. Soon, Zhuowen's divine sense sounded in everyone's minds. Only then did they realize that Zhuowen had unknowingly dodged the terrifying attack and appeared on the other side. However, Zhuowen was too far away from them. Moreover, the Master of Destiny's aura had already locked onto Zhuowen. If Zhuowen also entered the space-time roulette, it would be harming everyone. Everyone on the space-time roulette also realized this. Moreover, Zhuowen had already given the order. They could only allow the space-time roulette to quickly break through the air and leave under Xiao Hei's control. After the space-time roulette left, a stream of light quickly came from another direction in the starry sky and landed not far from Zhuowen. The man in front of him looked to be about 30 years old, but he had a head of white hair. He wore a loose robe, but it still could not hide his strong physique. Zuda, you're finally here. Now that I'm about to be killed by this bastard, and my limbs are all crippled. This is all your fault. If my father finds out, I don't need to tell you what will happen to you, right? The moment Huang Ziyi saw the white-haired man, he revealed a look of joy. However, he quickly scolded coldly. Zhuowen could clearly see that after seeing the white-haired man, Huang Ziyi's originally trembling body calmed down a lot. Obviously, Huang Ziyi was very confident in this white-haired man. Zhuowen sneered in his heart and mercilessly broke Huang Ziyi's remaining left leg. Then, Huang Ziyi screamed again and again in fear, not daring to speak again. The white-haired man named Zhu De narrowed his eyes when he saw that Zhuowen still dared to touch Huang Ziyi in front of him, and killing intent flashed. Chapter 2678, Huyi Divine Arrowzhuowen slowly retreated with Huang Ziyi in his hand. He had consumed a lot of energy when he used the profound meaning to create the Qi blade. Although he had used the Heavenly Way origin crystal to recover a lot of his primordial qi and had taken some healing elixirs, he knew that if he were to use the qi blade again, he would be seriously injured even if he had a 2-star Pangu sacred body. Moreover, he doubted that in his current state, could he really defeat the white-haired man in front of him with the qi blade? From the white-haired man, he could feel that the Destiny Master's strength was far above that of Hunyuan Master. To put it bluntly, even if Old Bai and Old Wu worked together, the white-haired man would probably be able to kill them in one move. Let go of the crown prince and leave your head behind. Zhu De only spat out this sentence, but it was filled with an unquestionable command. Zhuowen just stood there coldly. Facing Zhu De's ferocious aura, he said indifferently, "What if I don't let go? Then die." After Zhu De finished speaking, he took a step forward. His terrifying aura was extremely terrifying, as if the sky had collapsed. Soon after, Zhu De suddenly punched out. The force in the air transformed into a powerful hurricane that actually enveloped Zhuowen's entire body. Zhuowen immediately displayed the power of the Pangu sacred body to protect himself from the raging energy. However, he soon realized that Zhu De's target was not him, but Huang Ziyi in his hand. Fart! Huang Ziyi was directly blasted into a bloody mist. Before he died, Huang Ziyi died with his eyes wide open and stared at the indifferent Zhu De. He only had time to say, "Zhu De, you," before he completely lost his life. Zhu De withdrew his fist and was still indifferent. He looked disdainfully at Huang Ziyi, who had turned into a bloody mist, and said indifferently, "You're just a playboy. Do you want me to obey your orders? Now that there's a scapegoat here, I'll just kill you. When the time comes, I'll just capture this scapegoat and report back." Zhuowen hurriedly retreated. Looking at Huang Ziyi, who had died in Zhu De's hands, his pupils could not help but shrink. It had to be said that Zhu De was really ruthless. He had actually killed his own master, Huang Ziyi. However, he also knew that by killing Huang Ziyi's words, it meant that Zhuowen would be the scapegoat. So, Zhu De only translation, all, Zhu De was to kill Huang Ziyi and house. It had to be said that Zhu De was good. "Kill yourself in front of me, you." Zhu De placed his hands behind his back and looked at Zhuowen with disdain. Zhuowen translation translation, translation translation, translation, translation 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 translation, Zhuowen translation Nen translation 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 translations translation 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 translation. Zhuowen fell silent. The pressure that Zuda gave him was just too great. If he wanted to deal with such a powerful enemy, he would probably have to use a powerful trump card like the Hui Divine Arrow. When Zhuowen used Hu Yi's Divine Arrow for the first time, he could not even activate it. The energy in his body was almost sucked dry. If it was not for the green-haired mummy, Zhuowen's life would have been in danger. Fortunately, Zhuowen had many Heavenly Way origin crystals and had already cultivated the 2-star Pangu sacred body. Zhuowen was confident that if he used Hu Yi's Divine Arrow this time, he could at least shoot it out. Seeing that Zhuowen did not make a move, Zuda frowned slightly. Then, he saw that the white-robed young man in front of him had unknowingly taken out an ordinary blood-stained horn. "It seems that you're going to resist." Zuda's lips curled into a mocking smile. He did not care that Zhuowen had taken out the blood-stained horn. The blood-stained horn looked weak. It did not look like a powerful treasure at all. It would be strange if he cared about it. "Then, you'll die." At this point, Zuda's lips curled into a cruel smile. Then, he casually clapped his right hand. Suddenly, endless Taoist rhymes condensed into a huge stone platform like an earth-shattering hurricane. The stone platform was golden and had complicated patterns on it. It was a weapon that Zuda had casually condensed with the power of the Heavenly Way. Although it was just a casual attack, Zhuowen could feel that this attack was much stronger than that of Elder Bai and Elder Wu, who he had killed. After Zuda made this attack, he put his hands behind his back again. His eyes were arrogant, and he did not even look at Zhuowen. In his opinion, Zhuowen, an ant, would definitely die under his attack. With his status, why should he care about the life and death of an ant? Zhuowen stopped in midair and took a deep breath. Then, he chanted a mysterious incantation. Then, the originally ordinary blood-stained horn exploded with a monstrous evil spirit. The evil spirit was just too terrifying. It was almost tangible, forming mountains of corpses and seas of blood around the horn. It was like a scene straight out of hell. Zhuowen paled. 80% of the energy in his body had been absorbed in a single moment. Moreover, the Hu Yi's Divine Arrow was constantly absorbing his energy. It was about to suck him dry. With this in mind, Zhuowen immediately connected to his miniature world. At the same time, he used the Devourer King's innate ability to devour. He began to madly devour the surging energy in the special-grade Heavenly Way origin crystal mine. In just a single moment, he reached a balance between the absorption and release of the energy. Zhuowen seemed to have become a transfer point for the energy. As the energy constantly flowed in, the evil spirit of the Hu Yi's Divine Arrow became even more terrifying. It seemed to stir up the sky, and a shocking killing intent locked onto Zuda. Zuda, who was originally unconcerned, felt his hair stand on end. He stared at Zhuowen in disbelief. To be more precise, he was staring at the blood-stained horn in Zhuowen's hand. The killing intent that erupted from the ordinary horn that he did not care about actually made him shiver all over. He felt the true threat of death. Ever since Zuda had become a Heaven's Mandate Lord, this was the first time he had felt such terrifying killing intent. It was enough to make him feel the threat of death. Moreover, the killing intent was becoming more and more terrifying, to the point where he was terrified. Zuda wanted to leave immediately, but the killing intent from the blood-stained horn had locked onto him. He knew that no matter where he fled, the horn would be released and would hit him. It was only a matter of time. "Wait. Huang Ziyi's death has nothing to do with you. I won't pursue the matter of you killing Huang Ziyi. I'll leave right now." "Put away this weapon," Zuda immediately said. "PFFFT." Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were cold, but his heart was filled with bitterness. He had no choice but to release the arrow now. Even if he wanted to stop it, he probably would not be able to. The Hu Yi's Divine Arrow was just too terrifying. If he did not release the arrow and it was stained with blood, he would probably be the one to die. Only now did Zhuoan realize just how tyrannical the Hu Yi's divine arrow was. It was fine if he did not release it, but once it was released, it would definitely be stained with blood. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.